Hello everyone, it is the Enforcer, and today I'm coming with you to talk about the Day 28 news of the past 24 hours of events that have occurred within Ukraine. There's a lot for us to talk about today, a decent amount of news that happened inside the country, so much so that I actually was not able to cover any international news whatsoever, but I will make a special note right now that President Biden of the United States has arrived in Belgium to begin important talks with other European powers, but beyond that, there has been no news that I would really like to include today outside of Ukraine's borders that is interesting enough to supplant the news that we've got inside Ukraine. There is loads of it, a lot of new information that we've seen, and so we're going to definitely dive into that really hard today. So I'd also like to mention that I forgot to say yesterday in the video that there is Rasputitsa. I'd like to say this at the start of the stream. There is still Rasputitsa ongoing inside of Ukraine because it's spring, and as we know, the leaves are starting to sprout from the trees, and so we always need to make sure to take note of the weather, because sometimes I forget to mention the weather because there's so much other stuff going on here. Nonetheless, we're going to go over the schedule for today. The first area we're going to cover is, of course, the Northern Front, as usual. We will cover the events surrounding the Kyiv area and the Chernihiv area. We shall then move on. For some reason I was like, why weren't the markets showing up there? But anyways, we'll move on to the Eastern Front, the location unknowns. We will then answer some questions in between both of these fronts, then cover the news on the Eastern Front. We will then move on down towards the Southern Front, but in between the Eastern and Southern Fronts, we will stop to take more questions and answers here. And then we will move on to the Southern Front and wrap up all the news we found here. Surprise! It's really crazy to me because usually there's just a one or two bits of news every day that we have to cover around the rest of the country, and a few things that we have to cover internationally, although most of the international news was further on inside of Russia. But today we actually have none of that because we have something like 37 different topics of news that we found today, so make sure to stay tuned because we're going to get to every single one of them. So, starting off our bit of news, there was a dam that was breached right up here. This is the exact dam. I wish I could show you a better illustration of it and what it looks like. But this dam is part of the Dnieper River reservoir that's north of Kyiv. I thought that it was the Russians that breached the dam during the Ukrainian counterattack and that they did it to slow the Ukrainian advance. But it turns out, as more news came out for me, and also a lot of my viewers told me this, and then I looked into it and it turns out to be true, the Ukrainians apparently breached this dam many days ago to try and slow the Russian advance, and then their counterattack began afterwards. So I got the sequence of events there mixed up a little. Very important, though, to get that sequence of events right. And we actually have a bit of time-lapse footage of that flooding in the Irpin River. So I'm going to show you all that so that way y'all can see how extensive it got. So we can see here on the first day the dam was breached, and everything north of here could not be fjorded anymore because the flooding was too severe. We move on to the next day, and you can see that this flood water has moved on much further down and is starting to reach the Hostomel Bucha Irpin area. So now we can see that the Russian supply lines trying to cross this area are going to be heavily hindered because of the high water and, you know, the rise in the river's water levels, which will make it too hard for them to cross a bridge because either they're submerged or the bridges could be washed away. So then we watch as the days go by, and now we can see that this massive floodplain from this dam here has reached all the way down to pretty much the Hostomel area. So the Russian logistics of everything south of that, I'm assuming, this is all of course an assumption, maybe they found a way to combat this, but considering that the Ukrainian counterattack has pushed them all the way back to this floodplain and across it, one could only assume that this apparently hindered their logistics and their strategic situation in this area, and based off of that, they then had to retreat as the Ukrainians were pushing them back across the floodplain to the other side. So that's very interesting to actually see it unfold day by day, so that way we could actually know how bad the damage and effects of this dam breach was, because it appears that it was actually very significant. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news that we've gotten around the Rakivka area, where we can see a Stugna-P in action. I'm going to show you this video right here. It's very neat. Once again, it's just the usual Stugna-P in operation, and I think it has copyright music. It does, so we're going to have to mute that, unfortunately, but I'll give you all a play-by-play. So as usual, to explain a little bit to the new viewers. If you're new, by the way, welcome. I hope you like the news, and if you do, make sure to join the Discord and like the video because it helps us spread the news, and it also keeps you up to date as to when these streams come on every single day. But nonetheless, the skiffs were actually supposed to be exported to Saudi Arabia, from as far as I know, and due to the outbreak of the war, they were never exported. So now the Ukrainians have pretty much taken them into their own use, and they've started using them themselves, and that's why you see the Arabic writing on the interface, is because these are actually supposed to be exported to Saudi Arabia, which is an Arabic-speaking country. But nonetheless, we can see in this video that they have a tank in their sights on the camera. They're lining it up at the moment. I believe they're starting to go through the process to launch this ATGM. They have now launched it, and it's en route to that tank. The footage just kind of gotten blurry here as far as the skiff goes, probably because of dust kick up and stuff. But the missile is on the way. And then we can see there that it hit the tank and destroyed it. This is an after picture right there of that tank being destroyed. It's impressive to me, really, because something that's really interesting to me is that we've kind of seen a shift as far as the videos have gone of what ATGMs are being used. At the initial outset of the war, we actually had a lot of Javelin videos of Javelins being used in destroying tanks, but now we're starting to see so many more Stugna-Ps. And so it's really interesting to me that the Ukrainians are using something I believe is domestically made a lot more so than the Javelins that have been hyped up a lot. So let's take a look at that and see where the Stugna-Ps come from, just so that way I can make sure that what I'm saying is correct here. So let's take a look at this. A skiff. Alright, so Stugna is a skiff. Nonetheless, let's take a look here. The designer is, of course, in Ukraine, it's the Kyiv Design Bureau. So we do know that this is a domestically built product. When was it made, though? Do we have a year? Oh, it's a very new product, actually. It was produced in 2011, so it's only about 11 years old, which in military terms is a pretty young weapon system. Nonetheless, now that we know that, that's pretty interesting to know that they're using a lot more domestically made ATGMs, which aren't getting really as much credit in the news as they should be, apparently, because we see more evidence of them destroying tanks than Javelins or Western gear is. But then again, that may just be because those videos are being censored by the Ukrainian government because they really don't want anyone to see how effective they're doing, although I really wouldn't understand why they're doing that. But then again, that's entirely my opinion and kind of based off of the information we've gotten and the assumptions we can make off of that. We're now going to move on into the town of Rakivka, where we can see Russian tanks moving around the village, and we can also see some of the floodwaters in the video. So I'm going to show this to y'all. Of course, the floodwaters are down here, and looks like it's getting kind of high. And there is, of course, no audio, but there's a Russian tank right here where my mouse cursor is. You can see it firing. But the floodwaters, I believe, are going to stop most ideas of advance. Because if we go back to this part of the video, oh, man, it's looping around. Hang on. If we go and see this here, this is a massive floodplain. And it doesn't really look like it's that deep in some areas because it appears that the grass is still tall enough to be rising out of it, but I'm not really, there's probably a lot of things that I'm not considering here with this. Like, for example, it's making the ground incredibly wet, and as we know, Rasputitsa is a thing, and I'm sure that it's a lot worse when it's in an actual floodplain filled with water. So that may be leading the Russians, since it doesn't look too deep in most places, that may be leading the Russians to not have as much success in the Kyiv area as we've been seeing in prior days, is because they just can't move armored vehicles across this like muddy bog that this floodplain has probably created at this point. Nonetheless, very interesting stuff to see that we actually have video evidence of the floodplain as well as satellite footage, which shows us that the floodplain has gotten very large and spans an incredibly far area, all the way down to the Bucha Irpin area. So it's a good thing I said the Bucha Irpin area, because we've gotten more news out of Bucha and Irpin, where we can see that white phosphorus is once again being used apparently over the Bucha Irpin area. In this picture here, you can see the example of white phosphorus being used over the city. It is a very interesting looking thing because honestly, it kind of looks like tinsel off of a Christmas tree. But nonetheless, that's what white phosphorus looks like according to the Ukrainian government. I don't really know exactly what white phosphorus looks like when it exploded at night. So I'm not really exactly sure on my part because I'm kind of ignorant about white phosphorus and how it's used and such. But if it is being used, that is once again another war crime. White phosphorus isn't supposed to be used directly on enemy combatants or civilians. And if so, the enemy combatants are supposed to be proven to have been killed in the blast instead of being burned alive by the phosphorus. So, with that being said, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we're going to see some Russian Su-25s in action over Irpin. It appears that they dropped some bombs on Ukrainian positions and then began to evacuate the area. So we see, there they are in flight. It's very interesting to me. I don't really know if this is normal, but for the two aircraft in this formation to be so close in combat, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's just kind of like a camera illusion. Maybe they're like a quarter mile away from each other. But still, it's almost like an air show formation that they're flying over a war zone. But nonetheless, I could, just be a little bit ignorant on how aerial formations operate in a war zone. But nonetheless, here's the rest of the video. You can see that they're flying towards Ukrainian positions. You see that they're popping flares and chaff, probably, maybe chaff. And you see the bombs explode. And we actually saw one of those explosions kind of create a blue kind of color, and I'm supposing that it hit something electrical, and that's what led to the explosion generally having a blue looking color, is that it knocked out an electrical unit like a generator or something like that. But nonetheless, it looks like they dropped their bombs on target, and now that they're veering off, they will, probably fly off into the sunset in a way, I suppose, unfortunately. Maybe they'll get shot down in the future, who knows, but, that's something to see for another day and see if we get videos coming out about that. So that being said, what's crazy about this is that there is a decent amount of news today that came out of the Kyiv area, but not a lot. As you remember earlier in the war, there was just tons of news that came out in this area because it was the most heavily fought over area in the war, but I feel like not a lot's coming out anymore because the Ukrainian counterattacks are being relatively successful and the Russians don't want to televise defeats, and the Ukrainians don't really want to televise their success to a large amount. So now we're going to move inside of the city of Kyiv, where we can see a before and after picture of the Kyiv shopping mall. This is what it looked like before. I'm sorry if the picture's incredibly small, but this is what the mall looked like before, and this is what the mall looks like after. You can actually see that the wing that juts out from kind of like this skyrise part of the mall was entirely destroyed. It looks like this is the superstructure of that part of the building, and it's pretty much just collapsed in on itself. It's very unfortunate, but I do have to say that it was very ignorant of the soldier that uploaded the picture that Ukrainian soldiers were at that mall, because we've seen that happen before, but it was with a Foreign Legion guy that apparently was from Reddit as far as the story goes, and he posted a picture of where their staging area was for like upvotes or something on Reddit, and he happened to disclose the location of the Ukrainian army, which was inside of a school at that moment, and so the Russians began to bombard that specific school. So that was kind of dumb on that guy's part, and he got people killed in the end. So that's kind of a message to all the Ukrainians in the chat who may want to upload things, perhaps, to be extremely careful, because that does help out the Russians in targeting y'all, specifically civilians and soldiers included. So always make sure that anything you're uploading is incredibly safe, or maybe check with the authorities to make sure that what you're uploading will be safe to be viewed and won't be incurring any additional casualties or damages to the war effort and the cause. So now we're going to move on from that to the Chernihiv area, because we've actually covered all the news in the Kyiv area at the moment. And so now we're going to move up to Chernihiv, where we've actually gotten a decent amount of news today, which suggests that there may be a resurgence in combat in this area, because for the last few days I've constantly said day after day there's really no news or action coming out of Chernihiv, and today we actually have 4 different separate videos and events showing that there now is. Firstly, we can see that more Tigers apparently hit an anti-tank mine, anti-personnel, well, some sort of anti-vehicle mine. I'm not really sure if it was an anti-tank mine per se, but we can see that the vehicles were destroyed entirely. Well, this one specific Tiger was destroyed entirely. It was flipped over, and it appears that it's missing half of the rear axles. Don't do me like leaf springs on that one. So sorry, y'all. But anyways, that's all we can tell from this. Can't really tell too much rather than it was destroyed, and that's always interesting to see. What's also interesting to me is that apparently the explosive force was so great that it actually apparently flipped the Tiger over, and it would have been interesting to actually see how large that explosion was for it to flip a several-ton vehicle over. But nonetheless, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from inside of the city of Chernihiv, where we can see that there has been a massive amount of damage. This is actually the mayor driving us around in this video, and so I'm not going to talk too much and just let y'all see the damage.
Ну, дивіться, усе було пряме попадання. Очевидно, нещодавно. Трактор також горить. Ви розумієте, так? Тобто ми знаходимося в зоні бойових дій. Тут
безпосередня зона бойових дій.
Край небезпечно.
Але ми раді, що ми тут перші народні депутати, як ми зрозуміли, з Максимом Саврасовим.
Далі їхати не варто, тому що практично ми під'їжджаємо до блокпоста росіян 200 метрів, 300 можливо.
Ну, 200-300 метрів від блокпоста орків.
Значить, от білий будинок,
Так.
білий з вибитими шибками.
Так.
Apparently someone shot out the road sign up here, which is interesting to me. But nonetheless, we're going to continue the video.
Вулиця Клинова, вона йде на кладовище Ясово. Кладовище Ясово, на жаль, це міське кладовище.
As you can see, the damage is actually very extensive. You can't even tell where the road is really due to the amount of debris that's been spread across it.
Тимчасово, ми так сподіваємося, на інших кладовищах вже закритих, яких територія
Вже раніше вже не використовувалася.
не використовувалась.
Є таке, що людей ховають во дворах?
Поки такого
Такого нема, слава
невідомо. Але, ну, скажімо так, є питання черг, і є сьогодні декілька діб, ми людей змушені тримати в моргах, а морги це рефрижератори. Це все посічені будинки.
Скажи, будь ласка, яка твоя оцінка кількості мирних мешканців Чернігова загиблих? Безпосередньо від
Справа
бойових
в
дій.
тому, що я це пояснював багато разів. Справа в тому, що ми не ведемо статистики цієї, тому що 200 зразу це підвідомственність прокуратури. І прокуратура займається там разом з військовими, і там окремий облік. Ну і очевидно, із зрозумілих причин. Це мікрорайон Бобровиця, який фактично він знищений абсолютно. Магазина таке.
Це величезний мікрорайон, просто повністю знищений.
От, ви очевидці, от оскільки зараз пожежа, то це щойно було бомбардування. Щойно в цей будинок щось прилетіло.
It's very interesting to see fires raging now. I'm assuming that the fire departments inside of Chernihiv are so overworked right now that they just can't get to all of them. And so fires like that one may just go and be left to blaze on until there's nothing for it to burn off of, which is interesting.
Тому що стан, який тут зараз ми бачимо, це стан 2 тижнів.
Але все
Подивіться,
продовжується.
горить, значить, очевидно, що сюди щось прилетіло, тому що горить. Вчора він був сілий.
Ще працював вчора.
Він був сілий, я його особисто вчора бачив, я навіть можу показати фотку, там де ми розверталися на полі, там стояв вже здичавілий, в шоковому стані кінь. Там десь була ферма. Він собі просто стояв.
Anyways, as you can see in the video, the damage has been extensive to Chernihiv. It has not escaped the damage along with Kyiv and Kharkiv and some of the other cities that we've actually seen around the country. And it's very unfortunate to see that, especially Mariupol. Mariupol's taken more damage than every other city probably at this point. But nonetheless, it's very unfortunate to see that such damage is being caused. And we can only hope that the civilians that were within all of these buildings made it to safety before the Russians decided to start attacking their homes, regardless whether they were in them or not. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we can see fires raging in Chernihiv. This video appears to be taken from a skyrise of some kind, but you can see multiple fires across the entirety of the city. I'm not really sure if these have been ongoing for days or not. One thing that we can probably assume is that if they're new or been going on for days, it's showing that there may be an increased level of activity in Chernihiv that we haven't known about until now. Finally, we have a little bit of unfortunate news today from the Chernihiv area, which is Ukrainian artillery that was spotted and destroyed by the Russians. So I'm going to show you all that video. As you can see here, it's a Ukrainian artillery unit. It looks like they're trying to move the artillery from location to location. Perhaps now they're setting it up in this part of the video. And now we can see that the Russian artillery is beginning to hit this artillery in a form of, I guess, counter battery fire or something of that nature. I'm not really sure it's the exact military terminology. I don't really try and get caught up in that too much. I just try and get caught up in the overall strategy and logistics of the war for the most part. But we can see that the Ukrainian artillery was entirely destroyed. It was only two pieces, and not to mitigate it, it's unfortunate to see losses, and it shows that the Ukrainians are not an infallible force. But we can see that it was a somewhat smaller number of artillery units and pieces compared to what we've seen in other videos, where it could be like 8 artillery pieces on the Russian side or 4 on the Ukrainian side. So while the losses are unfortunate, it's not as large as what we've seen before. So now that we've covered all the news in the northern front, we're now going to start moving on to the eastern front. But before we do, we're going to take some answers from the chat and see what we got. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, good afternoon, chat. I hope everybody's doing well. The first question up for the night is from Gunnar Olson. They put in a $23 donation, and they say hi from Norway.
Well, howdy from Norway. It's glad to. I'm glad. Sorry for butchering that, but I'm glad to know that you're on the stream, and it's good to know that we have an international audience here, because it's very interesting to know that people from around the world are always watching this. So thank you once again for being here, and I thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Uncle Lar27 with a $20 donation. He says, what is the significance of the Lieutenant Colonel Intel PSYOPs officer caught today in Ukrainian underwear?
I don't really know, because I haven't really heard that story, and I don't really think there's a lot of significance to someone's underwear. So I hate to say, I really can't talk about that due to ignorance of the actual topic. And on top of that, I don't really think that undergarments have a lot to do with the situation or how things unfold. But nonetheless, thank you very much for the support and the interesting question. In a way, I just hate I can't answer it all too well. But that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, I just want to quickly recognize a donation without a comment from Kevin Grant. He puts in a donation of $20. Kevin, thank you very much for the support. The next question up is from Zero. He puts in a $20 donation, excuse me. He says, what percentage of super chats and donations you receive are being donated to the Ukraine war effort?
Actually, I try and donate about $100 a week. But the thing is that super chats are to support the channel, and we run fundraisers every Sunday to support causes that are in Ukraine, like Doctors Without Borders or the American Red Cross. And on top of that, due to some issues with YouTube, it's going to be about a month or a month and a half until I actually get any of the income off the super chats to even budget for videos or anything like that. But thank you for the support, and that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Anthony Miller. He puts in a $20 donation. He says, keep up the great work. In your opinion, what piece of military equipment that has been promised but has not yet arrived in Ukraine would be most helpful to the Ukrainian military?
I'm not really sure. Honestly, I think all the equipment that has been promised has arrived in some quantity, but some of them maybe less than others. We don't really get a lot of official numbers of what exactly crosses the border into Ukraine. We just know that something like Stingers have arrived, or Javelins have arrived, or Panzerfausts have arrived, and we don't know if it's the whole shipment, part of the shipment, or if it's an ongoing deal of trying to ship the stuff there. So, I would say probably the thing that they're probably wanting the most right now is, of course, more missiles for the Javelin launchers. Probably, because anti-tank equipment is something that they desperately need, considering that the Russian doctrine revolves around the use of pretty much armored waves. So I hope that answers your question to a pretty good bit. I really don't know much about the supply situation with what the Western countries are sending to Ukraine, because that information isn't really made too public, rather than like the initial number pledged, but we really don't know how it gets there or what the Ukrainians do with it once it gets there, or how much they're getting. But thank you nonetheless for the question. Thank you very much for it. It's a very interesting one, and I'll try and maybe, circle back around to that and get an answer to it at some point. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up is from Benny Tome. He puts in a donation of $13 and says, just another Leaf Spring donation. Slava Ukraine, keep up the good work.
Thank you very much for the support, and Slava Ukraina. I think I think that all of y'all like the Leaf Springs so much, and I've been trying to watch the comments as much as possible. If y'all like Leaf Springs, everyone just say Leaf Spring here in a minute, because y'all just love the Leaf Springs for some reason. I don't know why, but y'all do. So thank you very much once again for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Trey Woodward. He puts in a donation of $10. He says, "We also had tornado warnings last night. Are you a fellow Georgian?"
No, I'm actually from Alabama. Me and my question guy Matthew, we're both from Alabama, so yeah, we're kind of in the area, but we're not in the state. But I thank you very much for the support, and I'm not going to say too much about where specifically we are in Alabama because that will dox us. So thank you very much once again for the support. And that being said, we're going to answer 2 more questions, and then we're going to move on to the Eastern Front.
Okay, and the next donation up is from V8 Muffler Boy. He puts in a $10 donation. He says, "Leaf Springs Eternal. Thank you."
Oh my lord. Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'll make sure to save a leaf spring for you. By the way, we're actually looking at the situation in terms of the Russian captured and destroyed vehicles, and it appears that there may be a large amount of leaf springs that the Ukrainian farmers will be kind of like receiving in the coming weeks, that, if they haven't already. So make sure to keep an eye out on the leaf spring market, because I'm sure that there's going to be heavily discounted Russian leaf springs soon. So thank you very much once again for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the last question.
All right, and the last question up for this segment is from Wolfgang Zavago. He puts in a donation of $10, and he says, "War with Russia is inevitable. I'm a 45-year-old civil engineer in California. I have a great life. I live my life in peace. But if my country calls me to bear arms against Russia, I will do so without hesitation."
Well, thank you very much for the support. I'm kind of in the same camp in a way, that war might be inevitable. I feel like it's something that we're trying to avoid heavily in the West. A lot of Western countries do not want to go to war, but that sometimes that doesn't really pan out. But we'll just have to see in the coming days and weeks if that becomes a thing that appears to be clearly inevitable. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much once again for the statement. It's a very interesting one, and I'm glad to know that you would support your country and the struggle if there was to be one in the future. And so now we've covered all the questions that we're going to be covering for this question segment, and now we're going to start covering the news of the location unknowns, the Sumy area, and Kharkiv, which is all encompassed in the Eastern Front. So, the first bit of location unknown news, and we've had a decent bit today, but not a lot, is that another Stugna-P is in action. Apparently these are also called skiffs, which is interesting to me. I didn't know that. But nonetheless, here's the video of it being used. You see the Russian vehicle out there in the distance.
О, видно охуєнно. Все, тепер йому точно пизда. Єбать труси. Вище, вище. Єс! Знімай, знімай!
As we see they hit it. Then we can see another video.
Де, ти що бачив?
Його захуярили,
Ні,
артою накрили.
не захуярився. Не їде, він їде ще. Надо. Єс, попадає, чи ні?
Знімай, знімай, знімай.
They actually didn't celebrate like the last guys. The last guys acted like their sports team had just scored the final goal of the game to win, but these guys seem a lot more collected about it.
Знімай.
Це не Панама?
It's interesting to see. I don't know what exactly the kind of vehicles, whether it was a tank APC or something like that that was destroyed, but it's still good to know that 2 Russian vehicles were destroyed in this footage alone, and it appears that the Stugnas are still getting a lot of use and a lot of action out of this in the end. So it's just really interesting to see. And once again, I have to circle back to the whole thing about the Javelin. Everyone was hyping up the Javelin at the beginning of this war, but as the war has gone on, I think they've started to rely less on the Javelin, and it looks like most of their anti-tank work by the infantry is being done with the Stugnas. So that's very interesting to note, and we'll see if that continues to be a trend over the coming days. But now on to the next bit of news, and we can see a Ukrainian OSA anti-air system in action. We actually won't be seeing a Ukrainian OSA air defense system in action because apparently this post was deleted. So very interesting. Don't know why. It was a very neat video actually, because The OSA is like one of my favorite Eastern Bloc anti-air systems. I find it to be incredibly interesting in its design and its actual appearance, but nonetheless the video has been deleted. So I'm sorry about that. We're going to move on to the next bit of video where we can see Chechens fighting on the front line. I'm not really sure whose Chechens these are, but I'm thinking that they may be Russian. They're also trying to brew tea in the middle of a war zone, and then a bomb blows up behind them, but then they just keep on brewing up the tea. An interesting video in a way. Very odd to me that they're trying to brew tea in the middle of an active war zone, but nonetheless, I guess I'm not going to judge. I guess people kind of get tired of fighting, and I guess they're going to find any way to do something rather than fight. But anyways, we're now going to move on to the next bit of video where we're going to see another Russian tank destroyed by a Stugna. As you can see, it was a bit of a violent explosion, but we can see that the tank has most definitely been disabled at this point, which lets us know that that one won't be used anymore by the Russians. There's not really much to be said about that one. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see satellite images of the destruction all around the country. I'm not really sure which cities these are. It just gives a list of cities that these could be. But you can see in this one that there is fires everywhere around the city. And what's also interesting is that you can kind of see like the original Soviet design of the city, how the Khrushchevkas and all this are just laid out in kind of like a perfect way. You know, I don't really know how to explain it, but it's kind of like the Soviet style of like city construction. So that's very interesting to see from the air. We're now going to move on to the next picture, where we can see another city, from what it appears, also heavily damaged and fires burning everywhere. Now, this is Mariupol, because that's the children's theater, actually, that was destroyed. So we know that this is Mariupol for sure, and we can see that the damage, at least in terms of visible fires, we can see appears to be rather extensive, which is incredibly unfortunate, because we know a lot of civilians are still trapped within the city, but a decent amount of them are trying to escape. But we'll get back to that later once we reach Mariupol and talk about the news down there. In the next picture, we can see some satellite footage of what appears to be an artillery unit. I don't know what country this belongs to. It could be Russian or Ukrainian, but it appears that they're out in the field. They have their support trucks, I guess the trucks that probably carry the artillery with them, in the background. And we can see that there are more trucks down here just kind of camping out. I'm not really sure if these are supporting the artillery or they just happen to be there. Not entirely sure, but an interesting picture nonetheless. We're now going to move on to the next picture, where you can see another unknown location. And I believe this picture has actually been shown on the stream before, but there is a fire near a rail yard. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this picture was actually tracked down to be in Chernihiv somewhere. So we're going to cut that picture a little bit short and move on to the next one, where you can see the pot marks of artillery. In this area, you can actually see it all around. It looks like they may have endured some MLRS strikes, because we see little pot marks in the backyards of houses and a decent amount of destroyed houses as well. But as you can see there, the damage is once again extensive. We're now going to move on to the next picture. This is once again, looks like another picture of Mariupol, because we can see the destroyed children's theater there. And what's very interesting about the children's theater is that it existed during the German invasion of Ukraine in the 40s, and the Germans didn't destroy it, yet the Russians have now. Actually, the Russians nor the Germans destroyed it, both when it was being captured by the Germans and when it was being recaptured by the Russians. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about in kind of a historical context, is that in World War II, which is the highest casualty war in history that we know of, they didn't destroy the children's theater, but in this war, the Russians did, which is very interesting. Maybe people may be assuming some things about how the Russian army is conducting this war now, but nonetheless, we can now move on to this next picture, and you can see that these high-rises have mostly been burned out at this point. It appears that they've taken a large amount of damage, and it looks like a decent amount of the houses in the area have also sustained damage or have been completely destroyed, which is once again incredibly unfortunate. Hopefully there were no civilians inside. And so finally, we're moving on to the last picture, where we can see what appears to be a large car convoy moving down the road. I'm assuming that this may be one of the car convoys out of Mariupol, because we've been hearing a lot about this, or maybe this is a car convoy in another location of the country. I'm not entirely sure, but we do see that it's a large convoy of what appears to be civilian vehicles. So that's actually all the pictures that we have from this one picture set. And so now we're going to move on to Grandpa, because Grandpa brought the Ukrainian army a present. So I'm going to show you all this.
Гляньте, пацаны, кацапюрки, блядь. 50-й региончик, нахуй. О, нашел. Сука, пиздец, раз я проебал. Дед, ну ты красавчик. Ты, блядь, при колпаке служил, наверное, блядь. Что там, есть?
Глянь, что я приобрел.
Бля, нихуя себе у нас тут.
Смотри, приобрел.
Да ты что, ты вот
Фотографируй меня.
красава, для интернета, блядь.
Сука, крупнокалиберная. Я говорю, ебать, тебе урод буду
С автомата, я ебашу.
Тут Серега выходит, такой БТР.
О, спальный мешочек.
Серега выходит, ну ты лежишь, давай сюда.
As you can see there, Grandpa apparently brought the Ukrainian army some supplies, which is very interesting to see. And I wonder how he actually managed to steal the truck and get it to him. Like, what did he just walk up into a Russian camp, hop in it, and drive off? I feel like that's the most unlikely story. I feel like it was abandoned on the side of the road somewhere, and he just happened to just get in it and drive it to the Ukrainian military. So now we're going to move on to the next bit of video that we see, which is some new farming implements that the Ukrainian farmers have apparently received. Pretty interesting stuff. I have a feeling that the Ukrainian farmers are going to have a lot of free farming equipment to use in this new season of planting. So now we're going to move on to the next bit where we can see Chechens making tea. I think we already actually covered this video earlier, and we did, so we're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we see that the Ukrainians capture a BTR. And not just any Ukrainians, these are Ukrainian citizens, just normal people who hopped in this BTR and then just started to drive it away.
Спиздили БТР в руки. Спиздили он БТР. Ебашим! Ебашим, пока вас не ебашили, нахуй. Работает элита, вон, прицелы наводящие, блядь. Ебать.
Anyway, it's pretty neat to see that the, let's see, what you might call it, the BTR, sorry, I forgot about that. The BTR was captured by the Ukrainian citizenry. We've seen that a couple of times with certain tanks like the T-72 or the T-80, but, you know, BTRs are interesting nonetheless as well, and it's pretty cool to see that occurring. Anyways, moving on from that, we can see a Bayraktar in action here. It appears to be operating in the position of an artillery spotter. So I'm going to show you all this. And it looks like it's drawing in the Ukrainian artillery fire onto this Russian battery, I'm assuming. We can actually see what appears to be a vehicle trying to drive off from the shelling that's occurring on their positions. And then we can see in this other video, it appears that a Bayraktar is guiding munitions, or maybe it's dropping munitions itself on a roadway and hitting Russian tanks there. Very interesting stuff to see. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that a supply truck was destroyed.
Ну что, сука? Ручи свайна, блядь.
I don't know, of course this is a location unknown, so I don't know exactly where it is, but we know that there's been a decent amount of snowfall around Kharkiv, and kind of in between Kharkiv and the Sumy area, so I'm assuming that's somewhere in there, but we don't know exactly where. So we can see here that it has been destroyed and is burning profusely.
Вітання від третьої сили.
A Ural 4320 most likely.
Ебаться, сука, тарахтей.
And we see another video here. I'm assuming that that's the aerial footage of that exact supply truck getting, you know, hit. And so now we're going to move on to the last bit of location unknown news, where we can see an unexploded missile in someone's house. I got to make sure to mute this one, I believe. No, I don't actually. But we can see they're walking into the house. It appears that these may be police of a kind. But we can see here that they have a missile in what appears to be their bedroom. I'm assuming that the Russians like to give people presents, and so they just dropped this off for this guy for some safekeeping, or maybe for him to keep forever. You know, I mean, like, the Ukrainians aren't taking any taxes on anything that the Ukrainian citizenry is able to capture as a war spoil. So, you know, this guy, well, of course you're going to remove it. I'm just kind of joking about that. Bomb removal unit is probably going to come in there and get that thing out. But, you know, there is the off chance that the guy actually just keeps the thing. We've seen that in some cases. So now we've actually covered all of the location unknown news, and we're now going to move down to the Sumy area, where I have to give my usual disclaimer that today we've actually heard no news from the Sumy area. This may suggest some kind of lull in the fighting, or maybe people are just getting tired of uploading constant war footage every single day because they've gotten worn out and are kind of used to it in a way. But nonetheless, we've gotten no news from the Sumy area, nor the Troishchinets area further south. So now we're going to move on to the Kyiv area, where we've gotten a little bit of extra news today, and we can see some interesting events in the city. First off, there was a market that was hit and caught on fire, and now in this video, we can actually see the aftermath of that market once it has pretty much burned to the ground.
Вот так вот выглядит сейчас наша Барабашова. Ребята, просто какой-то ужас. Господи, за что это все? Посмотрите.
Пиздец, ну, бля.
It's very unfortunate stuff to see, and it appears that the video is looping after that. But I hate to see that that market was destroyed. If you've actually watched Bald and Bankrupt, who is a YouTube channel that traveled around the Ukraine, Belarus, Russia area a decent bit, he actually did go to that market. So if you would like to see what that market looked like in detail before the war, you can go to his channel and see it in one of his videos of Kharkiv. So we're now going to move on to the next video from inside of Kharkiv, the only other one we've gotten today, which is Kharkiv ablaze. It actually looks a lot similar to Chernihiv in a way, where just multiple fires are currently burning around the entirety of the city, and it's unfortunate to see. And as we can see now, the video is looping, so I'm going to cut that one off. But it's unfortunate to see, because you know that there's a decent amount of civilians still stuck in all of these towns, and to know that they're under the constant threat of being shelled and bombarded and being wounded and killed, you know it must be incredibly stressful to them every single day to sit there and have to endure that stuff. And so now we're going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten on the Eastern Front as a whole, which is pictures of a Russian pion, I'm not really sure how it's pronounced, but we can see it being used near the Kharkiv area. Note the snowfall that's still on the ground in this area. A very interesting picture. It's really neat to actually see the artillery gun firing and see kind of like the plume of gunpowder, I guess you could say, that's kind of coming out of the front of the barrel. But a very interesting thing to see, and it's a very interesting picture. Hopefully, the pion will be destroyed in counter-artillery fire in the near future, and the Ukrainians can start to relieve some of the damage and death and suffering that is occurring to the civilians inside of Kharkiv. So that being said, we've actually covered all the news on the Eastern Front, and so we're going to start moving on to the Southern Front. But before we do that, we're going to take some questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so we do have quite a few super chats coming in. So the next one up is from S. Moore. He puts in a donation of $20. He says, still hearing the mines are float loose in sea of Azmov. Also mines set in water off Odessa. 15,000 Belarus troop entering the war, and NATO sending older surface-to-air missiles. There's some controversy there. One sockeye salmon equals $20.
Okay, thank you for. I don't know what's up with the sockeye salmon. I think I kind of missed that joke. I know where the leaf springs came from, but I don't know what's up with the sockeye salmon things. But thank you nonetheless for the support. And also, I'd like everyone to know, because apparently there was a question in the chat earlier about this. We run fundraisers, and I donate as much as I can to the fundraisers. But the super chats are to support the channel and what we do here, because this is in a way a job, because I spend a large amount of time doing this every day. And so if you support the channel, you help me make sure that I can keep on to produce this content every single day for the war. I just like to clear that up, because apparently there's been some misunderstandings apparently in the chat about that, although that's been made clear since the start. So to answer that question, I have heard about the mines being laid around Odessa and somewhere in the Sea of Azov, which is interesting to me, but I don't really know about the Sea of Azov and the mines being laid by the Ukrainians there, because the Russians control the port of Berdyansk, and I don't really know how they would get a patrol boat or some kind of boat that the Ukrainians have to Mariupol to begin mining the waters around there, because as you know, the Russians control the entirety of the shoreline, and they would have to first probably pass through the Kerch Strait to get into the Sea of Azov, because there's really nothing that the Ukrainians control anymore in the Sea of Azov to launch patrol boats from. But I do know that laying mines near Odessa is a definite possibility and most likely true. As far as the Belarus thing, I actually haven't heard about Belarus committing troops to the war, so let's take a look at that. Does Belarus... and that's a bad way to phrase it. We'll just put in Belarus joins war and see if we get anything. It doesn't look like there's any news here when I type it in that says that Belarus has joined the war. I'm not entirely sure. We do know that it seems like Lukashenko is trying to hype up the Belarusians and say, hey, the javelins aren't anything, guys. Don't be scared of that. But I don't really think that's working all too well because we actually haven't heard on my end of the Belarusians joining the war. But thank you nonetheless for the support. It helps us to continue to run this channel. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question up is from MMC. He puts in a donation of $20. He says, any news about the train war? Z's reliance on railway logistics and shortage of supply trucks must be important. Keep up the good work.
I actually haven't heard anything about the trains. And let me make sure that you... can you rephrase that question to me again? Because I want to make sure that I cover most of the parts of it, if not all of it.
So he's wanting to know if Russia is engaging in a train war. He's saying that Russia relies heavily on the railway, and he wants to know if they're attacking the railways now.
Yes, they do rely heavily on the railways. They're actually the only country left in the Western world, or maybe even the entire world, as far as I know, that leaves the railroad aspect of things as a major part of their logistical chain. They actually rely on railheads to a large degree, to the point that their actual truck force in terms of supply is incredibly small. As far as we can tell, it's around 4,000 supply trucks that they have, which is an incredibly small number compared to most Western armies and, you know, the size of theirs. We know that we saw an armored train in Melitopol some time ago, which does suggest that they are using trains in the war, so it kind of answers the question of them being used in the war or not. And we do know that the Russians rely so heavily on the supply side of the trains that they are probably trying to get their railway construction battalions to start constructing or repairing the railroads, entering Ukraine and trying to fix those. So, yes, I would assume that they're probably heavily involved in that at the moment. We also do have a few suggestions that the Russians already have the pipeline battalions or divisions. I'm not really sure of the exact size of those units, but we do know that they have the pipeline units currently operating in the northern area of the country around Kyiv, trying to lay pipelines so that way they can try and remove the trucks out of the stress of having to carry all of the fuel to the front lines for the military, or at least shorten the distance that those trucks are having to travel. So I hope that answers the question to a pretty good degree. I hope that it did, because railroads are kind of like a big thing to me. You may also know, well, actually, what's interesting, to kind of give a little bit of a backstory instead of going into something else, is that when this war started, I was actually a gaming channel, and I was streaming Train Sim World 2, and I heard that the Ukrainian war had started, and the Russians started to bombard cities, and so my first stream was cut off, like my first stream of Train Simulator, just because I was like, you know, I might as well stop playing the games I'm playing and maybe play something like Truck Simulator, so I decided to play that. I actually stopped playing that, and then came over here and started to report the news, and so 28 days later, here I am, still reporting the news, trying to get the most accurate and pertinent information out there to y'all. So, pretty interesting how that's kind of a little ironic in a way, but I thank you nonetheless for the question and the support. It always helps us out to keep on running this channel, and so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Adrian Scott. He puts in a donation of $15. He says, hi from Sydney, Australia. With the deliberate flooding of the Irpin River, is it likely that Russian forces were entrapped on the wrong side in the face of the Ukrainian counterattack?
It may be the case. I'm not entirely sure, though, because as far as we know, the Russians have been pushed back across that floodplain, and from what we can tell, the floodplain has existed during the entirety of the Ukrainian counterattack, so maybe they were able to move those Russian units across the Irpin kind of like floodplain, but at the same time, maybe they did kind of like a Dunkirk thing, and they managed to get all the personnel over, but maybe they left the vehicles behind. I'm not really sure, though, because we haven't gotten a lot of video evidence to suggest either. What we know right now is that the Russians managed to apparently get pushed back across the floodplain, and now that they're stuck over there, and the Ukrainians are stuck on their side in a way, and no progress has been made over the last day moving any further forward, or the Russians pushing them back again. So I can't really get an exact answer to that question due to a lack of information and news that's come out as to what the Russians did in response to that floodplain being created. But I hope I answered that question, at least in assumptions, the best I can, using kind of like the facts that we have at the moment. So I thank you very much once again for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next donation we have is from Sherry Herman. She puts in a donation of $10, and she says, "Enjoy some coffee on me." And Sherry, we do appreciate the donation very much, and I'm sure the Enforcer will definitely get some coffee with your donation, so thank you very much for the support. The next one we have is from Fedor D. He puts in a donation of $10. He says, "Love your stream, appreciate the support for Ukraine, Slava Ukraine, and Heroim Slava."
Thank you very much for the support, and Slava Ukraina. I can totally agree with that. While I do try and keep the news neutral on here, and sometimes I do admit I do get a little bit biased in my fervor, because I do want the Ukrainians to hold out and get some kind of peace agreement that's favorable to them. But I do try and report the facts the way they are, and try and report the news as we're getting it, and paint the picture as accurately and non-biased as possible. But once again, I thank you very much for the support, and I entirely agree with you. Slava Ukraina, Heroim Slava. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up tonight is from Fuzz the Cat, putting in a donation of $10. They say, "Love your work. If it's helpful for you, clips you can usually hit maximize and volume will turn on automatically. Just hit volume speaker, not volume slider, to turn on sound on and off."
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't think I knew that. I'm not really a tech savvy person. I just, kind of do what I do on the computer. But I thank you very much for the input. I'm going to look into that and see if that's the case, and if we can start implementing that maybe in future streams. So thank you once again, Knuckles. You're always a return supporter of the channel, helping us to continue doing this every single day. And so I thank you very much once again. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Charles Close. He says, "Perhaps you don't want to read this aloud, but copyright your content and sell it to Activision for the next Call of Duty, saving Ukraine. Cheers, Charles Close."
Well, thank you very much for the support, but we're not trying to do anything like that. That's kind of weird. Hell, you could get this information after the war. I'm sure people will be writing books all about it. Maybe I'll be sourced on it, since this is a day-by-day kind of like video documentary about the war in Ukraine. Literally every single 24 hours, one of these comes out like clockwork every single day. And so I think, I don't want to be presumptuous saying this, but this may be the best documented source of video information out of the war on the internet. But I don't want to say that, because maybe there's someone out there I don't know about who's literally getting every single piece of film and putting it onto a map, kind of like me. But then again, I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Anthony K. Smith, a longtime channel supporter. He puts in a donation of $15. He says, "Hello, guys. First, how much I love you guys. I did a Russian equipment loss calculation based on day 26. I have the individual numbers, but it is too big to list. Total is 6,933 billion, and that is not including ammo."
Interesting. I think he may be talking about to that day, which is really interesting that you gave us that figure. That's actually a figure that we've been trying to get a hold of and maybe calculate, but I haven't had the time recently to really sit down and try and figure out the cost of all the destroyed vehicles. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, because that helps me know and get a good grasp of what actually is going on in terms of the economic losses that the Russian army is facing. Because we all have to remember this, okay? I went through this last night. The U.S. has something like 8,790 armored vehicles. Well, not armored vehicles, main battle tanks specifically. The Russians have somewhere around I think it was like 20,000. It was a huge... Let me check that number again just to make sure. Countries by tank number. Countries by tank numbers. Let's see if we can just get a general list. Russia has 13,000. The United States, according to this list, has 6,100. But the one we saw last night said it was around 8,700. But nonetheless, you can see that the Russians outnumber the Americans in terms of a tank force by 2-1. But the thing is that if we pull up the U.S. military budget, which is public information, in 2019, they had a budget of $686 billion. And if we look at the budget of the Russian military in 2019 to make sure that the numbers are comparative, it was at $65 billion. So it was 10% of the U.S. spending on the military, yet they have twice the tank force. So you can kind of get the picture that if we are spending that much money on our military, which, you know, some people can argue that it's overpriced, some people argue that it's not. That's not really what I'm looking for. But what I'm trying to say is that the Russians just don't have the budget to support an incredibly large tank force. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope I touched on your question a pretty good bit. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from longtime channel supporter George, New York's premier contractor. He says, that flood area you showed on the right of it and the river, there are 4,000 Russian soldiers stuck and helpless. Not a good place to be. We shall observe and see what happens to them.
Oh, that's very interesting. I did not know that, actually, because the information about the floodplain and how that's actually evolving is kind of coming out in fragments to me, at least as far as what I can document and put on here on the stream. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, because now we know not only do they apparently have a pocket on the southern side of the floodplain, but they also have a large pocket of an unknown size somewhere in the Bucha airport area that's been completely cut off from their own lines. And so the Ukrainians, I guess you could say, are kind of like pulling a Mariupol in two different areas by encircling the Russians and just slowly whittling away at them until they either surrender or they're destroyed. So that's incredibly good to know that they've done that in two different areas in Kyiv. You know that those will be crushing blows to the Russian army, not in terms of their actual fighting ability, but their morale, and will be massive morale boosts for the Ukrainians if they can manage to destroy or have both of those pockets surrender. So I thank you very much for sharing that information with us, and thank you once again, New York's premier contractor, for being a return supporter of our channel. It helps us to continue to run, and so I thank you so much, because without it, we wouldn't be able to make the news every single day. And so I thank you very much once again, and so we're going to move on to 2 more questions, and then we're going to start covering the Eastern Front news.
All right, and the next question is from Wayne the Sign. He puts in a donation of $20. He says, put this toward a leaf spring removal tool. Love your channel and the work you put into it. Keep going on.
Well, I thank you very much. I find that everyone's concern about my leaf springs is critically important, and I promise everyone that while this is a news channel, and I do like to keep it serious here, that the leaf spring thing is probably my favorite thing, because out of all the things that I've said and all the things that have happened in this war that I've covered, somehow leaf springs have become the thing for this channel, and on top of coffee funds and me saying that being said. So that being said, I thank you very much for the support. People's livers are probably failing because that drinking game is a very tough one to play. So we're now going to move on to the final question, and then we're going to move on to the news of the Southern Front.
And the final question of the segment is from Steve Frederick. He puts in a donation of $20. He says, thank you for all of your coverage. Is there a reason why NATO can't just sell jets, other weapons to Ukraine at a ridiculously discounted price and avoid being accused of engaging in the conflict?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure that they've looked into that, and they've tried to consider all options as to how to get aircraft into Ukraine without making the Russians say that they're getting actively involved in the war. But I'm sure that they have looked over that and seen if that would be a viable solution, and apparently they didn't believe it was, as far as we know. Then again, that's based off of assumptions and public information, and a decent amount of assumptions considering that maybe they didn't look into that, but I have a feeling that they probably did, and they tried to look at every way to support the support Ukraine, because that would be an incredibly popular political decision within almost every Western country. So I'm sure they did, and I don't really know what the problem or the stoppage in trying to execute that would be, but nonetheless, we can see that apparently there was some kind of pushback to that because they've just decided to not send the jets at all, which is kind of a little aggravating to me because aircraft are an incredibly important part of modern warfare. They are one of the main, I guess you could say, components of the modern world. I mean, like, if you ever look at anything that the U.S. did in Afghanistan or Iraq, you know, during the invasion of Iraq and the occupation of it afterwards, well, the Iraq War, I guess you could call it, and also our involvement inside of Afghanistan, aircraft were an incredibly important part of our doctrine in a way. Soldiers would go on patrol in Afghanistan, they would get shot at, and then they'd call in air support and have the wherever those people were just obliterated. You know, they'd drop like a JDAM on them or something. But it's very unfortunate that we haven't been able to send them aircraft, and I hope that Western governments and countries are still looking at some kind of way to skirt around what Russia's saying, find some kind of loophole, and send them in a way that Russia can't really respond to it. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support. And so, that being said, we are going to get to everyone's questions after the Southern news. I don't want anyone to think that we just go without answering questions if you're new to the stream and this is like the first time you've given a super chat. We will answer all of them before the end of the night. But for right now, this is the end of the first, the second question segment in between the Eastern and Southern fronts. And then we'll have a large question segment after the Southern front news has been covered. So now I'm going to take us all to the area of Severodonetsk, which appears to be under a decent amount of firefighting and artillery fire, where we can see that apparently today a chemical plant exploded in the nearby area. You can kind of see the mushroom cloud out there, and so I'll try and expand this video and then replay it so that way y'all can kind of see this explosion unfold in the distance. Also, I'll mute it. Okay, so what's interesting about this, okay, is that I live in the South, so, you know, Southern news is always important to me because it's local. In Texas, a chemical plant exploded in the similar fashion, and it made, like, news around here. I mean, like, even though I'm in Alabama and Texas is a pretty good ways away, the explosion was massive, and this appears to be almost the same in terms of how the mushroom cloud kind of, like, formed out of the explosion and what it looks like, really, rather than it's like they moved the mushroom cloud from Texas to Ukraine, and once again it's another chemical plant, and we're just seeing the same thing happen thousands of miles away in Ukraine, which is very interesting. And an explosion like that, if we're assuming that people were working at that chemical plant, we obviously know that people were probably killed in that explosion, and I feel very sorry for them, and I don't really know how it happened or why. Maybe it was some kind of accident. Maybe the Russians deliberately targeted the facility and said, you know, forget the civilian casualties, we're going to do it anyways. Nonetheless, it's very unfortunate that that happened. We're now going to move on to the news from inside of Severodonetsk, where we can see a decent amount of damage, much like we saw in Chernihiv today. As we can see, this apartment block has sustained a large amount of damage. Windows have been blown out across the entirety of it, and most importantly, there appears to be a large hole on the 3rd and 4th floor that may have been caused by an artillery shell or some other kind of explosion. In this picture, we can see that the top floor apartment rooms appear to have been destroyed on the corner of this building, and it appears that a fire is starting to ravage the upper floors and will probably continue on down into the lower floors as well. Incredibly unfortunate stuff. Hopefully no one was inside of these buildings when they were attacked. But then again, with Russian luck, we know that the Russians probably attacked a building with civilians in it just because. And finally, we can see here that this top of the apartment, this apartment block in particular, the top of it is actually starting to bulge out, apparently because the inside has been so severely damaged. We can't actually tell the true extent of the damage in this picture, but one can tell, considering that the wall is leaning out from the building, that it's nothing minor and it must be incredibly grave. So that's all the pictures and information that we've gotten from the Severodonetsk area. And so we're now going to move on to Donetsk itself, where we've seen a funny video of, I guess you could say, how poorly trained Russian tankers are. Anyways, to cut this short, the tank crashes into a bus. I'm going to show you all this. It's just weird. It's really bizarre. But anyways, here's the video. As you can see, I'm going to kind of back up on that a little bit. That tank took that bus for a trip. Just look at this. Like, hopefully no one was injured in that, because I kind of feel bad laughing at it, but you could see most of the people in that bus go from forward motion to rearward motion, and you know that must have been quite a shock for them. These appear to also be T-72B3s, which aren't light tanks. Well, they're lighter tanks by Western terms, but in terms of actual weight, they're around 43 tons, so it's kind of like an incredibly small freight car on a freight train barreling at this bus and then clipping it on the side and just dragging it back into the sidewalk. But that looks terrible, but funny. Hopefully no one was injured in that, or else I'll feel kind of bad laughing at that, because that looks like it may have been a little bit severe. But nonetheless, it shows you the inexperience in some ways of a Russian tank crew. But then again, the bus kind of pulled out in front of it, so you know, maybe they just need to trade insurance numbers and see if they can do something about that in the future. Anyways, also, it looks like the bus itself may have been totaled, because it appears that the tire popped off and just started rolling away. So I don't really know how bad the damage is on that side of the bus, but whatever it was, it must have been a little bit severe. So we're now going to move on to an area, and you may also notice something interesting, is that the Donetsk area used to actually stretch out to about here, where this olive marker is, like the black line did, which shows the areas that Donetsk and Luhansk controlled before the war. But we've actually found news today that there is fighting on the direct outskirts of Donetsk, so I'm assuming that my borders of Donetsk originally were not correct, and so they've now been adjusted to accurately represent what's going on there. And we can see some pictures from the current fighting in the outskirts of Donetsk and Marinka. So here are those pictures. We can see someone apparently using a heavy mortar. Very interesting. We can also see here, we can apparently see some Donetsk soldiers. This guy looks like he's having a fun time. This one also does too. I don't know what they're exactly carrying. I don't know what kind of ATGM that is, if it is one, but very interesting picture nonetheless. And then finally, we can see what I'm assuming to be a pro-Russian forces soldier walking through the debris of the town of Marinka. So we've actually covered all the news in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and so now we're going to move on to all the news we've received out of Mariupol today. Once again, Mariupol has been a hotspot in this war for quite some while, practically the entire week or more, and we continue to get more and more news out of Mariupol. So we're going to look at the city from the right side to the left and go over the news in that order. So the first thing we can see here is footage of Mariupol. And this is Russian forces moving through the city. I'm going to show you all this video right here. You know, this guy honestly sounds like a cold with how he's got like the sniffles and how he's breathing. I think he may have a cold. That's not going to get any better in Mariupol for sure. I think, if anything, he's going to get a little bit warmer when someone drops a Molotov on him from the skyrise, if anyone's still in him or left alive in him. But nonetheless, we're going to let the video keep running. Another interesting thing to me is that we know that Mariupol, according to both sides, is always embroiled in heavy firefighting, and so there's always the sound of gunfire somewhere in the distance. Yet whenever we see videos from Russia today, the only time we ever hear gunfire is from the people in the video, and then the rest of the city is entirely quiet, not even the thud of distant artillery blasts. So what I'm trying to say by that is Russian news tends to try and make a story, even if they can't just show it from the front lines. They try and come up with one, and I feel in a way that they're probably using like the areas of the town that are far away from the fighting. They're just going through and staging something for the cameras. Because it's really weird how it's always quiet in these videos except for what's going on with this one group each and every time. But anyways, we're gonna let the video keep running. He finally got the window bars off. Now it appears he's going to go into the building, along with everyone else. At this speed, though, with how fast you're trying to get into the building, I'm sure that if anyone's inside it waiting for him, they got a generally good idea that they're already there. But anyways, the video will keep running. So we finally heard some gunfire in the distance. Okay, I can't discredit that. We did hear some gunfire in the distance, but it was only like one rap of the gun. Like, where's the rest of the gunfire? This is supposed to be the most heavily fought over city in all of Ukraine right now. Just constant firefighting day in, day out, artillery barrages. We don't hear jets, we don't hear artillery. We just heard one rap of the gun in the distance, 2 shots from the guy in this group in the video, and that's it. You know, I'm not saying that this is entirely staged and is entirely fake, but considering that it comes from Russia Today, which just comes up with whatever story they want to for the most part, even before the war occurred, it always puts it into question whether this is actually authentic or if it's actually coming from the front or not. Anyways, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news we've gotten in the city, where we can see Russians on the move in Mariupol. The Russians are making ground, but from what we can tell, it's actually kind of slow ground. But then again, we don't entirely know. There's a bit of a fog of war going on, so they could be making a lot of ground, no ground. We really don't know, because the information coming out only shows us little bits and pieces of the ongoing fighting, but it doesn't actually give us precise streets and locations as to where this is. So we're not entirely sure how the siege is going, but we do know that as of today, the city of Mariupol still holds, and it could hold for, say, a much longer time, maybe a couple of weeks, or it could fall within the next couple of days, or maybe overnight right now. Who knows? But I'm going to show you this video.
Вот эту девятину осторожней, там сидит этот. Вчера с этой девятины снайпер работал.
As we can see, honestly, I gotta say this about how these people walk around. Why does this look like they're on a field trip from a school? Because this is kind of how, when I was in school, we would walk around when we were on a field trip. And they look like they're doing that right here. I don't mean to, try and interject opinion and stuff into it, but if there were if there were Ukrainian soldiers in this high-rise over here in the top right part of the screen, I mean, like, they're not even spread out. Like, a machine gun burst could probably get these 4 guys right here. And, I don't have to have a lot of military knowledge to know that. I've shot machine guns before, and I can tell you that getting that kind of spread and just getting all of them wouldn't be that hard. But anyways, I'm going to fast forward the video a little bit, get back to the part we were at. And so we can see, to help himself out, he's going to crouch in the wide open. There's a dumpster right here. There's also a tree stump just a little bit further out the way. But to make sure that he gets the best defense and kind of like, cover possible, he's going to just crouch in the middle of the wide open. Gotta respect it. It's pretty bold. We can actually hear distant artillery fire and gunfire in this video, which tells us that this one may not be entirely staged, and it appears that there was a blurred out object on the ground that I didn't notice until the end of the video. So we're going to leave that there, and we're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we can see the destruction in Mariupol. I believe that this is drone footage, if I'm correct. It is. And so I'm just going to let y'all watch this video that this drone took of the destruction in Mariupol, and you can see that pretty much all the buildings inside the city were destroyed. It's incredibly unfortunate and rather saddening. As you can see, it just goes on and on and on for the entirety of this video. I mean, really, it looks a lot like Stalingrad if we were able to get drone footage of what Stalingrad looked like in a way. You're looking at it right here. And this is in the 21st century, surprisingly. We can see that, I mean, it's not like the destructive capabilities of an army would decrease over time, but it's very interesting to see that the level of just pure destruction and, like, total war is still being maintained by some countries in their doctrine up till this day, because if it wasn't for the Russians, this city wouldn't look like this. In most modern wars, the idea is not to make a city look like this, but we can see that the Russians got a kind of like backwards idea on what modern warfare and strategy looks like. But I don't really think that that was their original intention, because if we look at the opening week of the war, the Russians tried to do American tactics, which was very little, like, a quote-unquote attacks on civilization, you know, attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, and they just tried to push troops into the town, do street-by-street fighting, clear them, and then move on through. But then they found out that that wasn't really working for them, because that isn't, like, their specialty, I guess you could say, in terms of training, and also they don't have well enough trained troops for that, I'd assume, considering that every time we see them in a video, they're all bunched up, and they don't really have a lot of, I guess you could just call it training. And so then they resorted to the tried and true method that they always go with, which is just leveling everything and then trying to roll through that. So moving on from that, we can see the last two bits of news here, and that's that the Russians are fighting in the left bank district of the city. I'll show you all that right here.
Подразделения народной милиции совместно с вооруженными силами Российской Федерации совершают зачистку левобережного района Мариуполя. Украинские боевики ведут огонь прямо из жилых кварталов. Вы можете наблюдать их огневые позиции, которые расположены в непосредственной близости от домов. Ведут огонь из верхних этажей зданий, переодеваются в гражданскую одежду и продолжают сопротивление, однако многие уже деморализованы и сдаются в плен. Наступление продолжается.
Это звуки в соседнем доме. Рвется боекомплект азовцев, который был в квартире. Судя по тому, что рвутся патроны уже несколько минут, БК у них там было очень много.
I just hate seeing all the damage in all these videos, because you know that these are lives that will be permanently uprooted. Every single apartment that is burned out, or every single apartment building that has to be leveled after this war due to the damage of it, is just a whole group of dozens, if not hundreds, of people who will not have the same lives if they ever are able to return. And it's just, it's unfortunate to think about that, and I just hate it. It's terrible. I really do hate it to a large amount. So now we're going to move on to the last bit of news from Mariupol. Apparently there's a lack of gas in the city now for cars to use to escape, and so now civilians are leaving on foot. I'm going to show all this right here. You can see in this picture that families along with their children have just packed up everything they can, and they're leaving the city any way possible. The devastation and destruction in the city is terrible, and so people are definitely getting desperate at this point. And we can see that this desperation has culminated into them just packing everything they can and walking from there and praying that they will be safe and not get hurt in the process. And so I hope they make it out of there safely, and I hope that the people in this picture have made it somewhere where they can get some kind of reprieve or get to some kind of safety. And so that being said, we've covered all the news in Mariupol, and so now we're going to move a little bit further down the country towards the Mykolaiv area, and then finally we'll cover the news in Sevastopol and then start taking more questions. So here we can see that in the area of Mykolaiv, there has been more captured Russian equipment. We're not exactly sure where, but apparently they've captured some military engineering vehicles around the Mykolaiv area. Oh, and it's got copyrighted music, so I'm just going to let you all watch the video. I'm not exactly sure what kind of support equipment this is that they've captured, so I couldn't really give you a lot of information of what this thing would be used for. But nonetheless, it's very nice that the Ukrainians continue to capture Russian vehicles intact, apparently, and it looks like this one may be completely in usable condition, like it was just abandoned by the crew. So I'm going to cut that video short because it's only got about a second left to it. And now we're going to move on to the next bit of news around Mykolaiv, where we can see a downed cruise missile that the Ukrainians have managed to shoot down. I'm going to show you all the video of that.
Крилатку збили, блядь. Бля, обережно вона, щоб не здетонувала, блядь. Я хуй знаю чого. Крилата, блядь. Крилата ракета, блядь. Збили, може наші ПЗРКшники збили, блядь. Да, це крилата ракета, блядь, поняв? Вона, блядь, вона розсипалась, блядь, по дорозі.
А вже похуй, диви. Вже розірває, якщо розірває, то вже розірває все. Дай це і спокій.
So we can just see that the cruise missile has been shot down in the field, of course, kind of like I've already stated, and now they're just inspecting the missile itself. Obviously, it probably hasn't been defused, or maybe it wasn't armed initially anyways, considering that it was still in flight and probably not near its target, and so it may just be safe to wander around. But nonetheless, they're very brave for getting close to a cruise missile, because I wouldn't do that if I was in that situation. I would have just looked at it from afar and been like, neat, that's a cruise missile in the middle of a field. So now we're going to move on to the last bits of news we've gotten from the Sevastopol area today in the Crimea region. And we can see here that the Russians appear to be firing large amounts of cruise missiles all in quick succession. So here from the coast, we can actually see that a coastal battery started to fire the cruise missiles. It's a very neat video. Well, not really neat in what the end result will be of it, but it's a very interesting video to see Russian cruise missiles launch, because they launch out of the tubes, they then fly a little bit up into the air, and then a rocket on the nose of the missile directs it downwards, then levels its flight, and then the main engines activate, and the cruise missile just starts flying on its course. So check this out, it's really interesting to watch. It's just very interesting to see how far modern technology has progressed, to see that such things like this are possible. But even in light of this is nothing compared to a SpaceX, I believe they're called, nah, I'm not going to even say, I forgot what the name of the standard SpaceX rocket is, but nonetheless, it's just interesting to see these cruise missiles in action and how they're launched. So anyways, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten of cruise missiles being launched in this area from a video taken at sea on a Russian ship. And so here we can see that the Russians were also launching Caliber cruise missiles off of this ship. So I'm going to show you all the video. just remembered the name. Hang on, I just remembered the name. It's a Falcon 9. I was wanting to call it a Dragon, but the Dragon was the crew capsule, and I knew that the capsule and the rocket weren't called the same thing, so it's a Falcon 9. Sorry about that, guys, but I was stumped for a second. But anyways, we're now going back to this video. As we can see, the amount of missiles fired from this one ship was incredibly large. It looks like about 8 of them that we could see in the video alone. So we know that a decent amount of cruise missiles started heading to their targets today. So that being said, we've actually covered all the news that we've gotten from Ukraine today. And so we're now going to begin to answer all of the other questions that we have in the chat tonight. And so before we begin, Matthew, how many super chats do we have?
So it looks like we're currently sitting around 20 to 25.
All right, so that being said, what is the first question?
So the first question is from Carolyn Evans. She puts in a donation of $20 and says, do you follow Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty? I follow them on Facebook and they have a ton of video information. Good job, and this has become my evening routine. Donated to Doctors Without Borders, and long live Leaf Springs.
Thank you very much for the support, and also the comment about the Leaf Springs. But I actually haven't followed Free Radio Europe, or however that name is pronounced. I kind of get that jumbled up in my head. I'm not really good with the names or titles of anything, but I have not checked it out. I usually try and get my information from a couple of sources, but I haven't actually looked into that one. So considering that you brought that up, and you say that there's some pretty decent videos and footage in there that we may be able to include on the news, I'll make sure to give that a look as soon as I can to see if we can maybe start adding that into the news. So thank you very much once again for the support, and I'm glad this has become your evening routine. I'm glad to know that a lot of people do enjoy the content that's put out on this channel. And so, that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
The next question is from none other than Mark Bohychuk. He puts in a donation of $20. He says $5 for coffee, $5 for rum, and $10 for better video game choices like DCS or X-Plane 11.
Thank you very much for the support. And also, I do have DCS World. It's just that I have never really had the time to dedicate myself to learning how to fly any of the aircraft. I've tried to learn the Su-27, and surprisingly enough, what was really weird is that I never flew it on the Russian side on the Georgian map. I always picked the Ukrainian Air Force camo, which was kind of weird because I didn't even know a single person from Ukraine at the time I was doing that. And then like about a year later, I met a friend of mine that is still friends with me to this day, although we haven't been able to talk much recently due to the war, but he is from Ukraine. So that was a really interesting kind of like foreshadowing thing in a way. But thank you nonetheless for the support, and also the multiple funds that you're now supporting me on. It helps out the channel continuously that people give us support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is John Rutkai. He puts in a donation of $20 and he says, please stop the leaf spring stuff, please.
I'm sorry, but I think that's something I don't even have control over. I'm sure that the chat's about to blow up with Leaf Springs here in a minute. I don't have control over anyone in the chat, so if they like the Leaf Springs, I'm sorry, but I guess they just like the Leaf Spring thing. But thank you nonetheless for the support. Maybe some Leaf Springs will smooth out the transition from the normal chat to the Leaf Spring chat, so you might want to look into getting a few of those as well for yourself. But I thank you for the support nonetheless. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from T. Lou, puts in a donation of $20 and gives a simple thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that you are supporting our channel. It helps us to continue to bring this news to people daily. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is Ken Harford, He puts in a donation of $20 and he says, do you think the Russian nuclear threat is just a scare tactic?
I think it kind of is. Usually countries previously have brought up nuclear weapons to just scare the world into taking them a lot more seriously, especially considering that the Russian military appears to be rather incompetent, considering how slow this invasion has taken place and the amount of casualties they've sustained. Really all they have left to rely on in terms of a threat is their nuclear arms, because you can notice that they're not actually threatening to invade anyone, they're just threatening to nuke them. So I think that's kind of showing that the Russians don't even have faith in their own military in a way, and it being able to carry out anything that they would see they need to do. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question in a way. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question comes from someone with a name that I cannot pronounce, but I will put it in the chat. It's a $10 donation. They say, as far as I know, Stugna is controlled remotely. I think they are setting them up close to Russian supply roads, and they can control it from the cover without fear of getting fire in return.
Yes, that is true. We can tell that in the videos because we can hear the Stugna fire in the distance, but they're never right up on it or close to it. So I think that's actually a really smart system, maybe even a little bit, although I'm not an ATGM expert, it may be a little bit better than the Javelin, because the crews that are operating this ATGM aren't having to be directly exposed at all to the tanks and the vehicles that they're trying to destroy. So I think that's a really interesting system, and I believe that's maybe why we're seeing it more so in use. It's because it's a more advantageous system to use, considering that the crews operating it don't have to be exposed at all. They can hide behind cover the entire time. So I think that's a really interesting thing, and thank you for sharing that with us. We had a good idea of that being the case, but once again, it's always good to hear it being reiterated. So thank you once again, and so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Charles Close again, with a $10 donation. He says, is Putin the first worldwide nuclear terrorist, having threatened NATO with being carbonized by his hypersonic missile tipped with his Satan bomb?
I wouldn't exactly say that. I'm not really a pro-Russian person, but the Soviet Union, before the Russian Federation began to exist, threatened the Western world like that a lot, and in turn we would threaten them with nuclear annihilation in a way. Also, I don't think it's really been out of the scope of possibility, and this is why the Western world focused so much in the early 2000s, and the whole of the 2000s and the early 2010s on dirty bombs, because a lot of terrorist organizations appear to always be apt to try and get their hands on a dirty bomb and then try and use it somewhere in a major Western city. So I don't believe he's really the first, but he's the most recent one in modern history that has taken it to this level. I would say that the threat of nuclear annihilation right now is incredibly close to the levels that we saw during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which, was a very large event that went down in history in a way. And so I think we're seeing that kind of unfold right here, and 40 or 50 years down the road, kids will be learning about this in the textbook around the end of the school year, and there'll be a rush through section because it's modern history, and of course history teachers don't care about modern history. But nonetheless, thank you very much for the support, and that's kind of my stance on it. But then again, anyone could look at it any way they want. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up is from Yves Songalo, putting in a $10 donation. They say, hi, Enforcer, I'm finally glad to catch you live. I love your work, but in all seriousness, can we take a minute and just admire Azov battalions pulling up Battlefield, meaning the game, in real life? They're heroes.
Yeah, I mean, Azov Battalion gets a lot of flack in a lot of ways. Some people say that they're a group of neo so-and-sos. I can't say it on stream. I'm kind of scared to, because people can get shot down for that. But the thing is that as far as we know, and the information we've gotten, that was rooted out of that unit a pretty decent while ago. And even if there is an amount present, it's an incredibly small part of Azov's fighting force. And so, I can't damn military for having those kind of people present, because when you really think about it, think about a military where far-right extremists do not exist. Like, think about the U.S. military and tell me out of the 700-something thousand people that are in the U.S. military, tell me that at least tell me that all of them are certainly not in that group. I mean, people come from all kinds of political backgrounds, and so to say that because there's one or two guys in that unit maybe who have those political ideals, we should not support anything that this unit does, or turn a blind eye to it. They're fighting incredibly heavily. They're giving up their lives to try and defend the city of Mariupol. And so I do have to give them credit, at least as fighters, moving on past the political scope of this thing, and say that they're doing an incredible job defending the country of Ukraine, and they're giving it their all. So I do have to agree with you in that regard. In other regards, it's kind of shaky ground, but I thank you for the support nonetheless. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Diffuse56, putting in a $10 donation. He says, is it true that Putin's $500,000 yacht utilizes leaf springs?
No one's going to ever give me a break on the leaf spring thing. This is going to keep on forever, and it's cool. It's cool. But it's just so weird. But anyways, yes, I think that it does have leaf springs. But I thank you very much for the support, and I like that everyone likes this joke. It's a pretty funny one. But anyways, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from A. He says, do they have leaf springs in Train Sim World too? I'm a Bama boy too. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much for the support. Yeah, I think they do have leaf springs. Let me pull. I'm sorry if everyone's going to not be like too happy about this, but let's pull up and see if leaf springs on trains. Yep, they got leaf springs. There's one right there in that picture, this picture, that picture. I know there's a load of them on steam locomotives. It looks like it's something on freight cars a pretty good bit. I'm not really sure what country they're from. This kind of looks like a British rail van. So maybe, but nonetheless, thank you very much for the support. Yes, they do have leaf springs there. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question. Thank you very much once again for the support, by the way.
Okay, and the next question is from Sherry Herman again with a $10 donation. She says, Enforcer, I have a lifetime career in channel development. Your business model is brilliant. Stick to it.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I would like to say that everyone who does support the channel is supporting me doing the news. We do run fundraisers because, we're trying to help out Ukraine as much as possible, and I have friends over there, and that was the original intent of this channel. Is when I heard that Ukraine was being attacked, I didn't actually believe it was going to happen, but when I heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have a friend who lives in Kyiv, he's going to be in danger over there, and so that's why this was created. And so this takes up a load of time every day, and so this is like a job, and so I have to kind of support myself on this thing like it's a job. And so everyone who supports the channel helps me continue to do this, while we will have fundraisers in the future, well, every single weekend on Sunday, to help out nonprofits and organizations currently involved in the Ukraine conflict, trying to help out civilians and whatnot. But I thank you very much once again for the support and the praise for the business model. Just trying to run it as effectively as possible, and also bring out the best news, because the most important thing is that the news has to be good. But thank you very much once again for the support, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Knuckles. He's putting in a $10 donation. He says, France just sent all 4 nuke subs into the ocean. I've heard other NATO countries are upping their nuke deterrence as well. The United States can't get through on their deconfliction line either. Here's the night's donation.
Well, thank you very much for the support, Knuckles. Didn't he donate earlier tonight?
I think that might be his first donation, and it looks like it's the first for the night.
Oh, well, for some reason I thought that he donated earlier. But anyways, thank you very much for coming back, Knuckles, and always supporting our channel. It always helps me out to continue doing this every single day. And so I thank you very much once again. And to answer that and kind of reflect on it in a way, I do think that nuclear deterrent systems in the West, and countries like the United Kingdom and France that possess nuclear weapons, are being put on high alert. And when the American nuclear forces may have also been put on high alert as well. It's just that we don't really get that information often or commonly, because that sort of stuff is tried to, usually it's a low-key kind of thing if we're getting close to that, although sometimes it's not necessarily the case. It's kind of like a situation-by-situation basis on whether we know if the nuclear forces are being alerted or not. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support and telling us that info, because I hadn't actually heard that. All I did today was focus on the war inside of Ukraine, because there was loads of news that came out today. So thank you once again, and so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question up for the night is from Patrick McHugh. He puts in a $20 donation, and he says, Russia claims chemical weapons exist in Sumy. to be deployed by Ukraine when Russian troops advance. This is likely a false flag. What is the importance of Sumy if Russia in need of this position? What do they stand to gain?
Sumy is an important location just because it's a major city, and the original Russian plan entering this war was to probably besiege the major Ukrainian cities that were within quick reach, and then force the government to try and get into some kind of talks of surrender, considering that the Russians would have a stranglehold on so much of the Ukrainian population. We didn't see that actually come to fruition. So while they're still fighting heavily over Sumy, the goal is still to try and just take the city and have a large amount of the population under their control or under threat of starvation and death. So the whole thing about the chemical weapons, I haven't actually heard that story. I believe that it is a false flag, because the thing is that the Ukrainians are scared that the Russians are going to use chemical weapons on them. And so if the Russians can construct a situation where chemical weapons are used on them, they can say that the Ukrainians have violated the rules of war, and so they are going to use chemical weapons in kind. So yeah, I do believe that that may be a false flag. I'm not entirely sure because I don't have a lot of information about that story or anything surrounding it. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless and sharing that with us. It lets me know a little bit extra that I may be able to work off of in the future. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Alex Ambrose. He says, "Great job, guys. Do you need any help with Russia or Ukrainian translation? Reach out if I can help. Not going to put my details here, but I am very qualified."
Well, thank you very much for the support, and we do have a decent amount of translators at the moment. It's kind of hard for, due to the schedule of how this news is put together, it's kind of hard to get things to the translators because the news, like the finality of this news is compiled just a few hours before the stream, and so it's hard to send all of that to translators and then get that back in time for the stream. But I would like if you would check in on our Discord. There's a link in the description below to it. And one of our moderators, who is like I consider our main translator, will probably look into having you put down in the translator tab, so that way if I do need anything translated, I can shoot it over to all of y'all and y'all can give me a nice little translation. I thank you very much for offering the help, and also the support as well to the channel, because it helps us to continue running. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next question is from SPAXER, putting in a $10 donation. They say, "You must be referring to our SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Great evening update. Myself and my SpaceX buddies enjoy watching your channel from work."
Oh, he's from SpaceX. That's cool. Well, thank you very much for the support. Tell Elon I like that he sent over the Starlink system to Ukraine in a way and is allowing them to use it, and that as far as we know, it is working. I know that isn't a SpaceX thing. Well, actually, it is a SpaceX thing. Starlink is kind of like operated by SpaceX in a way because they have to launch the satellites. But thank you very much for tuning in. I'm glad that there are people at SpaceX apparently watching us. That's really neat. And so I thank you very much once again. If Elon's watching this, let us know, because that would just be really interesting to know. And so once again, I thank you very much for the support, and I also am glad that a lot of the folks down at SpaceX appreciate the stream. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Adrian Scott. He says, "With a mind to the importance of cybersecurity and with your popularity, hit that upgrade button on your browser to get that security update."
Oh yeah, I might need to do that here in a bit. But that's something that's kind of hard to get around to because it eats up a little bit of time to get security updates and such. But once again, thank you nonetheless for the support. And it helps out our channel. I kind of give like the spill a lot, and I don't want people to think it's rehashed, but I do have to say it because it helps out our channel. And if y'all help out my channel, the news keeps on coming. So I have to thank you once again for helping me out and continuing to report this news. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Anthony K. Smith again. He says, "Hi again, guys. Sorry, maybe I wrote that wrong. It should have read 6.933 billion, 6.9 billion based on my research, not including ammo though. Maybe they need to buy some Lego."
Well, thank you very much for clarifying that, because I wasn't really sure what 6,000 something billion was. I was like, wow, that's a pretty high number. But thank you for clarifying that, because did he say 6.9 billion? Just making sure.
6.933 billion. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So that's actually a pretty decent amount. I would say, like, just doing a rough guesstimation off the top of my head, I think that's something like 10% or more of the Russian military budget per year. So that's an incredible amount of losses that they'll have to account for and try and replace in the future if they want to keep up to their original pre-war strength. So thank you very much for sharing that with us once again and clarifying the number, because I was kind of confused about it at the start, but thank you once again for clarifying it and supporting our channel. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question of the night is from Mark Geeson. He puts in a $20 donation. He says, all this talk about leaf springs, I feel the classic Monroe-matic shock absorbers are being left out. Anyway, keep up the great work.
Well, thank you very much. This is a Leaf Spring channel, and I will have to recognize the chat. From now on, I'm going to call y'all the Leaf Spring Army, because I saw a decent amount of people saying things like the Leaf Spring Battalion, the Leaf Spring Gang, but honestly, the Leaf Spring Army sounded like the best out of all of them. So from now on, y'all will be called the Leaf Spring Army. I hope y'all are all proud. Y'all finally got what you wanted in a way. And so I thank you very much for the support again, and we will look into the Monroe-matic, I believe that was how it's pronounced, suspension system, because while we're a Leaf Spring Army, that does sound interesting. So thank you very much once again for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Ghost Fox. He puts in a $10 donation. He says, FYSA, using a system like Starlink is a bad idea in an active war zone. It is a great way to end up with a missile falling on your head.
Well, I mean, maybe that's kind of true in a way, but I believe that it's mostly for civilians to broadcast information about the Russian military, not so much trying to let it be used for the Ukrainian military, but I'm not entirely sure. I wasn't really versed on how it's being used, but nonetheless, interesting input. I thank you very much for it and the support. And so, was that our last super chat? Is that what you said?
So no, we still have quite a few to get to.
Oh, okay. I thought you said that was the last one of the night. So, next question.
So I just want to recognize a donation without a comment from David Williams. He puts in $8. David, thank you very much for your support. Next up is Last the Dude. He says, I'm grabbing the ghost peppers.
He's going to die. Well, thank you very much for the support, and I hope you don't die tonight, because I have heard a lot in the chat about people playing the drinking game with the that being said thing, and people are getting liver poisoning. So always be careful. Always do things in moderation, because I'm not wanting any of my wonderful viewers to be harmed. So make sure to eat the chips in moderation and know when to stop, because I don't want you to die. I like y'all. I'm glad that y'all are fans of the channel and how I deliver the news. I try and deliver it in the most neutral way possible, just delivering the facts. So thank you once again for the support. Don't eat too many of those chips. And so that being said, I'm going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night comes from longtime channel supporter Geoff L. He puts in a $5 donation, and he says, you guys rock. I really hope to see more content from you after the war ends.
Thank you very much. We are trying to eyeball what kind of content we're going to be doing, and to kind of discuss a bit of my idea on stream, and maybe we can see if people like it a lot, because this is probably what's going to happen, is that I'm going to probably, since I'm in the United States and I've got to try and work within, something reasonable, I'm going to travel around the country maybe and start trying to get news and information on maybe social movements around the country and show one side and the other, and just present what they are and what they think and how they kind of counteract each other, and just present the information like that. That's something I've been looking at, because I believe that modern news these days always has to draw a line on what they think is right or wrong, and then they paint the story in that way. And I think it would be a lot better if we had a news organization, and since I'm pretty much heading one at this point, a news organization that will focus on non-biased reporting and just show the facts for what they are, present them to the public, and then they can decide what they think of it. The news is all about presenting the information for y'all to think, not for the news to get the information, paint it a certain way, omit certain things, and then tell the people what to think. That's my opinion on what the news should be, and that's what we'll probably be aiming for in the future. And then we'll probably maybe start branching out if we get incredibly large and start trying to do more international things, maybe like the Ukraine war, if those do occur, and look into doing that. But I thank you all very much for the support nonetheless, and I'm glad that you'll be around to try and watch the videos we'll make after this war. And so thank you once again, and that being said, take a sip, everyone, and we're moving on to the next question.
And just to let everybody know, just a heads up, we have about 10 super chats left to get to. And also, if you have been leaving questions with the @Enforcer tag on it, I have been compiling them in the spreadsheet, and we will have a chance to get to those once we're done with the super chats. But on to the next question we have from Ryan 9000. He says, I have tried my best to drink every time you say that being said, but I can't keep up. You are at war with my liver, lol.
Well, it's interesting that I just covered that. Make sure not to kill yourself in the process of doing that. That will be really bad. So always make sure to drink a whole bunch of water after that, so that way hopefully that will wash it out of your system. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless. Drink in moderation, everyone. Don't get sauced. Don't get like absolutely hammered either. So thank you once again. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question is from Rodrigo da Silva. He says, do you believe that U.S. military specialists are helping the Ukrainians with satellite images and images analysis on the low? That wouldn't surprise me.
I believe they are. We've seen a lot of evidence of Western countries as a whole helping out Ukraine with satellite images and trying to give them a better idea and a better picture of what's going on in their own country. And so I do believe that that is most likely a thing that's been occurring in Ukraine through multiple organizations and countries. So to answer that question, yes, I do think they are. I hope that answers the question pretty well. And once again, thank you very much for the support. It helps us out at the channel a lot and make sure that we can keep on bringing the news to y'all. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from John Klein. He says, maybe the next Sunday charity can be Save Our Allies. It's a spec ops intel folks organizing rescue efforts to get injured and stranded into Ukraine war zone out. It's a nonprofit.
Well, thank you very much for the suggestion. The thing is, though, is that we always have to make sure to operate these fundraisers that they fall under YouTube's kind of like guidelines, which is the guidestar.org website. So if we can find an EIN number for an organization like that, then we can use it. But if we can't, then it's something we can't actually do. So sadly, we're kind of limited by that. But we will look into it and see if that is a possibility. So thank you once again for the support and suggestion. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Rio Williams. He says, if Russia actually decides to use a small tactical nuclear weapon, how do you think NATO and the rest of the world will actually respond to it?
I feel like the response will have to be grave, because that'll be the first time a nuclear weapon has been used in combat. Well, not really combat, used in war outside of World War II. So that would be kind of like a turning the page in history kind of event. And so I'd have to assume that the Western response to that would be very severe, considering that nuclear weapons are viewed publicly as kind of like the end all. It's going to destroy the world in a way. And while tactical nukes are incredibly small and their kiloton yield is just incredibly minute, it's still the fact that a nuclear weapon is being used, which is incredibly a scary idea, because it shows that nuclear war on an international scale is just getting that much closer to becoming a reality. So I believe that the response would be incredibly dire. But thank you nonetheless once again for the support. And the question is a pretty interesting question. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up is from Ryan Nielsen. He leaves a $10 donation and says, I love the channel, and I hope you please look at the fundraising for Lifting Hands International. They're doing direct work for refugees in Ukraine and currently need funding for medical care for civilian victims.
Well, thank you very much for the suggestion. That sounds, honestly, because I don't ever want to shoot anyone down on donation fundraising ideas, because maybe they are there on GuideStar. That one sounds like the one that would actually be on GuideStar, because it's kind of just a goodwill organization. It's not really associated with the military or anything. So we will look into that one for sure. If we could take a note of that, Matthew, so that way I can make sure to double check on that one, and also the other one that was mentioned earlier after the stream, so that way we can see if those could be options. And so thank you once again for the support, and thank you for letting us know about that one, because that one actually sounds pretty good. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Last the Dude once again. For a $5 donation, he says, I'm back with the ghost pepper chips. Every time you say Leaf Springs, I eat a chip.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and Leaf Springs, Leaf Springs, Leaf Springs. Hope you have fun with that. Thank you very much once again. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
Next question is from Freedom First with a $5 donation. They say, how does Ukrainian military know the difference between Russian planes and Ukrainian planes? I'm worried about friendly fire with their Stingers.
I'm not entirely sure how they do know. I don't really know the process of identifying a Russian aircraft versus a Ukrainian one. I do think that the camouflage patterns on some of them is rather significant. Like if we look at a Ukrainian Su-25 versus a Russian one. Let's see if we can get a Ukrainian cam. Okay, this is a Ukrainian camouflage. It's like white. It's like on a grayscale of a sort. And then if we look at a Russian Su-25, I believe that is the normal camouflage color for a a Russian Su-25 is kind of like this green brown, kind of like green tan brownish color with a blue underside. So I believe maybe that's a way they identify it. But I believe the Ukrainian one, as we can see here, kind of also has the same bluish color underside, which is what ground troops will see. So I'm not entirely sure how they identify the aircraft. The roundels are also rather small. It appears on the underside of the wings if we can get an underside view of a Ukrainian one's wings, but I'm not really sure how they do identify it. Hopefully they have some sort of way to know which is which. Maybe there's a decent amount of communications as to where Ukrainian aircraft are, so that way ground forces know if there is an active Ukrainian aircraft in the area, so they don't shoot it down. But I'm not exactly sure, but there's a whole bunch of ways that they can mitigate friendly fire, but I don't know exactly which one they're going to be trying to use. But thank you very much for the chat, and I hope that answers the question in a way. I really can't answer it too much because, once again, my military experience is limited to history books and knowing a whole bunch of veterans and just listening to their stories about how things actually worked in war. So I don't know exactly like the deep down, like dig in kind of like ideas of how wars are fought and the exact like methods someone could use to identify an aircraft. So I'm sorry about that, but I hope I answered the question pretty well nonetheless. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and I'm going to take a brief moment to recognize a couple of viewers that left $5 donations without comments. We have one from Manny Dibb, Kathy M. Harris, and also Girls Rock 47. Thank you very much for your donations. We appreciate it. And like always, this helps the channel run the way it's currently running. So thank you very much for supporting the channel. The next question up is from Last the Dude once again. He says, thanks to all the mods who have been helping you out with your content.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I bet they appreciate the support as well. We all try and make sure that this thing runs smoothly. And so that being said, thank you once again. And we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Mark Geeson again. He puts in a $10 donation. He says, Stingers USIFF radio to prevent friendly fire.
Well, he reacted to that instantly. I thank you very much for the super chat and letting us know that, so that way we can know how they're mitigating friendly fire, at least on the side of using Stingers to attack aircraft. So thank you very much for letting us know that. That's something I didn't know, of course. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Mr. Z Pilot. He says, please look up Azov Battalion. Zelensky said today that denazification was off the table for a treaty. Please research this more before you judge.
I'm not really sure which direction you're going for there, but I have researched the Azov Battalion a pretty good bit because they're a huge point of contention in the war. And I just do have to say that if the Russians are entering this war to try and get rid of the extreme right-wing groups in Ukraine, and they're like quoting the Azov Battalion is that group, the thing is that the Azov Battalion is only made up about 10% of those people last time we got that figure, and that was when they were just created in 2014. So I don't really think that that's a present thing in their unit now, because I saw a lot of news articles saying it wasn't. And on top of that, you do have to remember the political context that this group formed up out of. The militia groups that kind of came out of the crisis in the Donbass in 2014 were all extreme leftist and communist. And so the antithesis of those communist groups was going to be the complete opposite, which is what they are. So you kind of have to put that in perspective, that whenever there is one side, there will always be the other. And it just happened that the communist side was the pro-Russian side, and then this side just popped up as a direct antithesis to that side trying to fight it. So I don't really think it was a direct thing that is kind of like representative of Ukraine. I think it was more representative of the political situation that began to unfold in that area. And so, kind of like how certain groups protest in America, and the opposite group, no matter what it is, always shows up just in direct opposition of that other group. So I think that's more of what happened. And then after time, I believe that was weeded out of the Azov battalion. But once again, we'll look into it a little bit more. And thank you for the support once again. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Patrick McHugh. He puts in a $20 donation and says, Russians have commandeered a humanitarian aid convoy and abducted those involved. Is this the first? With others abducted from Mariupol, might they be coerced into maintaining the false narrative of Russian liberators?
I don't really know about that specific story, but I wouldn't doubt that the Russians have been doing something like that. We can see that they've been mercilessly hunting down civilians in some instances, or just killing them with no regard, even though they're clearly civilians that are unarmed. So, as far as them taking a humanitarian convoy hostage, I wouldn't doubt it. But I do believe in the West they're not looked at as liberators at all. And as far, as that news getting into Russia, I don't think that would happen anyways, because the Russians carefully tailor the perspective that the Russian citizens are viewing at home. So I don't really think that's going to have much of a change on how people are viewing him. Most Westerners view him a certain way, and most people inside of Russia are being told how it is by, their state TV. And so I don't really think anything's going to change in any regard with that. But that's kind of my opinion. Of course, there's different things that could happen. Maybe that news would make it into Russia somehow and start to spread. Who knows? But that's kind of my opinion, and based off of what you said and going off of that. But I thank you very much for the support once again. And so how many super chats do we have left, Matthew?
It looks like we have about 8.
All right, so we're going to do the cutoff for tonight, because the stream is going to start going on incredibly long if we continue to take super chats. So I thank you all for your support, and if you do have a question and you'd like to send a super chat to get it answered, because that supports our channel and all that stuff, and you'll get something out of your return, which is me answering the question, make sure to put it in tomorrow first thing, so that way we can get to it, because beyond this point, we won't be answering the actual questions. So I thank you all once again for the support, and we're going to answer all the questions we have left. And so that being said, what is the next question, Matthew?
Okay, and the next question is from Charles Close. He puts in another $10 donation and says, P is international terrorist hypersonic missile, Russia to London, 5M tipped with Satan will take out London City. Great channel, thank you. This is the basis of NATO fear to be involved.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And I didn't actually know it would take that short amount of time for the missile, well, the hypersonic missile, to reach London and destroy the entire city. I don't really know much about the capabilities of the hypersonic missile. I said I would look into it yesterday, but unfortunately I haven't had the time in between today and yesterday to look into it. So I'll try and look into that as soon as possible. To try and get an idea of how much of a danger the hypersonic missile really is, because I remember when it actually was tested and it became a thing, and the whole entire world was like, "Oh wow, that's a fast missile." But I never really looked into it, because it's such a new thing that you have to assume that there must be a small number of them. So that's kind of what I'm going off of. But thank you very much for the comment nonetheless, and the info, because it helps us out here at the channel get a better idea of the situation in some regards. And so thank you very much for the support once again. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Mel Thornell. He says, your map looks like a dog biting Kyiv with his ear sticking out and his leg and tail near Sumy.
Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah, it does. If you look at it, like this is like where the eyes would be near Ivankiv. And you got the top of the snout, the bottom of the snout. You got a little bit of the ear up here. Maybe it's a corgi. Yeah, I have corgis and I love corgis, so maybe it's a corgi. But hopefully this little corgi gets popped with a newspaper or something for making it this far. But thank you very much once again for the comment. That's actually a very interesting observation. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is Mr. Z Pilot. He says, Also, I am not pro-Russian. I want Ukraine to come out on top, but I am also not blind to media propaganda and bias.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I'm not really knowing what you mean by that because I think I'm pro-Ukrainian, but I also think, based off of the information we're seeing and the state of the Russian military, that they don't really have much of a leg to stand on, really, at this point. We can see that Russia officially declared war a few days ago, and the situation still has not changed. They have not added any more units into Ukraine. They have not improved the logistical situation as far as we know. So everything has remained status quo as before. So I don't really think that they're going to be making a lot of progress. And I once again have to say to everyone that while it seems unlikely that Ukraine could win a war against a much larger and much more powerful country, I do have to always bring up the Winter War. And while people say, it wasn't a nuclear war, we're talking about the conventional side of it. The Finnish were incredibly outnumbered. You can see here that they only had 300,000 to 340,000 soldiers in their entire military. The Russians had dedicated about twice that number at the highest and about 100,000 more at the lowest to this war, with thousands of airplanes and thousands of tanks, and the Finnish only had 32 tanks and 114 aircraft. And at the end of this war, they got a white peace. They only lost 70,000 soldiers compared to Russia's somewhere around 340,000. So it's not entirely impossible for a smaller country to win an outright conventional war like this one. And so that's why I'm saying that I believe that Ukraine may win, because this has happened before. It's got all the telltale signs that that previous war had, where the Russians ran into major logistical issues. They had multiple fronts going at the same time, and they were slowly getting picked off and destroyed, and they never fixed those issues in the Winter War, and it doesn't look like they're fixing them now. The Winter War also went on for 3 months, so it wasn't a short war by any means. It was actually 3 times as long as the Ukraine war has gone on at about this point. So one can only assume that maybe this will end up being like the Winter War, considering the amount of progress that the Russians have made, and this amount of progress was very similar to what they did in the Winter War. And you can see here, look at this. This is actually a map of the Russian advances, and you can see, much like they did in Ukraine, there was multiple offensives heading for multiple major cities in different areas, and none of it actually succeeded in actually reaching its goals. But nonetheless, I'm not going to harp on the Finnish Winter War for too long. Thank you very much for the support, and I hope that maybe you'll look into the Winter War a little bit and see an example of a country that was facing overwhelming odds and still managed to win in a way, pretty much. So I thank you nonetheless for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to quickly recognize a $20 donation from Susan Bruce. Susan, thank you for the donation. The next question up is from O'Malley G. He puts in a $5 donation and says, is there any info about the civilians the Russians deported from Mariupol? Have there been any sightings of Russian concentration camps?
We do not know of any sightings of Russian concentration camps, and to answer the more direct question as to what happened to those civilians, we don't know. They've disappeared out of the public eye, and they've entered Russia. So we really don't know what's happening to them or where they've went. We can only pray that hopefully they're safe and that wherever they've gone, they're not faring too poorly, and they'll hopefully be returned to Ukraine once the war is over. So that's all we know at the moment. I'm sorry that there's not a lot, but we'll try and get more news on them if we can, if there's any news available on them. And so thank you for the support once again. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next comment is from Ron Edwards. He says, I hope you get the chance to see the John Bolton interview on Russia Today.
I might try and look into it, but once again, I do always have to say that Russia Today is kind of skewed heavily. And on top of that, I've never really had a lot of respect for Russia Today, because whenever I watch their news, they say silly things sometimes. Like, they brought on this guy who's like a fake. He didn't design the F-15, but he claimed he did, and then he was saying that the F-22 is terrible and it sucks, and funding ought to be cut for it. And it was kind of like a propaganda thing to try and make the American military stop focusing on modern technology and just try and keep with the on par stuff that they have with the Russians right now, like the F-15s and F-16s. So I will try and take a look at it, but everyone always has to remember with Russia Today that they're almost entirely a propaganda organization directly funded by the Russian government. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support and also the suggestion. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Alex Ambrose. He says, just a heads up, Russia doesn't have a small tactical nuclear weapon unless they've been violating the New START treaty for years, so it's very doubtful.
Well, thank you very much for the input. I actually don't know a lot about the Russian nuclear arsenal, and while I do confess ignorance a lot because I don't want to spread false information. Some people sometimes in like an attempt to look like they know everything, they give false information, but I don't want to be one of those people. So I really don't know a lot about that nuclear treaty, but if that's what you're saying and that is true, then that is pretty interesting nonetheless, and we'll have to look into that after the stream and see if that's true, because that will let us know that things like the Davy Crockett, although that's an incredibly dated system, the Russians wouldn't have anything like that. So thank you once again for the support and letting us know that info, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and I just want to quickly recognize a donation that just came in from Trademarks and Patents for Growing Businesses of $10. Thank you very much for the donation. And also a donation from Angelo Morty1 of $2. Thank you very much for your support. The next question up is from Takata Store. They say, it ain't much, but it's an honest daily contribution, and they donated $3.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm not trying to like strangle y'all for like support it or anything. It's just that any support y'all give continues to let me make the news and run this channel, and so I thank you very much. And once again, I want y'all to know that while I do donate $100 every time the fundraiser comes around, most of the, well, pretty much all of the super chats are meant to support me and my continued growth of this channel and the bringing in of the news every day. If you would like to support charitable causes, we are trying to source down a general link that you can click on to go fundraise, but I really want to kind of save all the fundraising abilities for Sunday, so that way we can try and get as much help as possible to those specific organizations that we're promoting here on the channel. So I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for being a return supporter. I'm sorry, I just butchered that. Return supporter of the channel, because it means a lot to me. And so thank you once again, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and this is just a heads up to anybody that is tired of hearing about the Leaf Spring jokes. There are a couple of Leaf Spring comments coming up. I have about 4 of them. I'm just going to run through them all together at once. We have a donation from Kiwi, who says, stream needs more leaves. And then we have another donation from Fuzz the Cat, who says, leave the springs alone. The next one is from Gus M, who says, I need Leaf Spring merch. And finally, the last one is from the analyst, who says, would you rather a blonde or a brunette Leaf Spring?
To answer the last one, I think I'd like... that's a brunette Leaf Spring. We'll say that. Thank you very much, all of y'all, for the support, and also for carrying on the Leaf Spring joke. I don't really want to use it too much because I do want it to be like a funny little joke to bring up here and there, but then again, I don't want it to die like memes do these days. They always enter the public eye, and then within like a few days now, they die because they get so used. So I want to try and use that a little bit in moderation on the channel, but I thank you all so much for being enthusiastic about the Leaf Spring joke, and so... with that being said, everyone take a sip. I know I'm killing all of y'all's livers right now through the question thing, because that's almost what I say every other question is that being said. So I'm sorry about that. I just did it to y'all again, but we're going to move on to the next question now.
Okay, I know we have passed the cutoff, but we have a viewer that just put in 2 $20 donations and asked the same question twice. So since he is very determined to get it answered, I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway. He says, I think the 6-day war that Israel had fought against 5 Arab armies and won is another great example of a David versus Goliath story. Do you agree?
I would have to agree. Israel has almost always been a story of David versus Goliath. They've usually fought all of their surrounding neighbors all at the same time every time. We can look at the Israeli War of Independence as an example of that. So yes, I could agree with that. That's another example of a small country that's facing overwhelming odds winning. And I'm sure if we look through all of history, there's a huge amount of examples of that. Like, for example, in World War I, well, really World War II and World War I in a way, but, no, it's just World War II. I'm sorry, correction. I'm getting things mixed up there. Greece beating Italy up to the point that Germany had to get involved. That was a thing. That was a small country that was winning until the big boy got involved and came down there and put him down, but... yeah, in that sense, a smaller country was beating a much larger country, and there's just a load of examples of it in history, so just because on paper a country is larger and should be able to do more doesn't always mean that they are always going to win. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into winning a war, and it all isn't just down to on a spreadsheet who is larger. So I thank you very much for the support and bringing that to our attention, because that's one I really never focused on a lot or at all until today. And so thank you for bringing that up and let me think about that for a second. And also thank you for the double donation. I saw that as well because I've been watching the live chat a little, and I'm not sure if that was a mistake or what, but I'm very thankful for your generosity. And so we're going to move on to the next question now.
All right. I just want to recognize a donation from Fuzz the Cat. Thank you very much for the support once again. And finally, our last super chat of the night is from Fair Witness, who says, is there any evidence or have you seen any credible propaganda deepfakes evidence?
I have not at the moment, actually. As far as I know, deepfakes have always been a thing. Well, they haven't always been a thing. They've been a thing for a few years now, and I've seen them as well, and they're always kind of convincing, but they're never right. I mean, I haven't seen one that's just right yet. But I'm sure with a decent amount of doctoring, you can make one look perfect. But I haven't actually heard of that being used in the current war right now. So I hope that answers your question a pretty good deal, because that's all the information I actually have on it at the moment. And I actually did see one last super chat roll in, Matthew, and while we did have a cutoff, I would like to try and answer that one. And so could you read off the one from Trevor Smith?
So it looks like Trevor said the tank ran the red light. So yeah, not paying attention to traffic lights.
Well, I guess that's pretty true. And I thank you once again for the support. And that being said, I thank everyone who did Super Chats tonight for the support. It always helps us to continue to run this channel. And so now we're going to answer 3 questions from the general chat, and then the stream will come to an end. And so what's the first question we got, Matthew?
Okay, so the first question we have here is from FL Nickel. They say, I wonder if there's any truth to the rumor that 69 Polish MiG-29s were somehow stolen from an air base very near the Ukrainian border. Maybe the Ghost Squadron, perhaps?
I have not heard that story, actually, and I would probably have to take a look into that, because I don't even think the Polish have 69 nice fighter jets in their inventory. Let me take a look at that real quick and go see. Polish Air Force aircraft. And let's see. We can get that number. Let's scroll down a little bit. Let's see here. Let's scroll down a little bit further. MiG-29s, they only have 23 of them, so that would be actually 3 times the number of MiG-29s they have in service. So I'm not entirely sure if that number is accurate. So I hope that answers the question in a bit, because if a news article said that 69 nice of them have been stolen, then we would see that reflected in the actual number of MiG-29s Poland operates. But I thank you very much for the question once again. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from, actually, this is a question that many users have asked tonight. Many people are wanting to check on Wally, the Ukrainian sniper, and if you have any word on his whereabouts.
Wally is alive. He's operating somewhere around the northern area of Kyiv. I was about to click on the little news link thing, but it would take me a minute to find it. I don't want to hold you up for too long because the stream is going on for a while. But we do know that he's alive. A picture was taken of him yesterday, and the Russians had claimed, and this tells us that a lot of what they're saying is propaganda, is that they killed him 20 minutes of arriving at the front lines. And that's not true, because he's still alive. So Wally is alive, and he's operating somewhere around the area of Kyiv. And so I hope that answers the question that everyone's been wondering about tonight. And maybe we can all gather together and send him a leaf spring of good luck, maybe. So I hope that answers everyone's question. And so we're going to move on to the last question of the night.
And actually, Enforcer, I have 2 more questions that I would really like to get to. There's one more that was just sent in a while ago that I told a viewer that we would get to. So if you don't mind, we can get to 2 more. But here's the first one. From Acer. He says, hey bro, what is your guys' honest opinion of the nuclear threat from Russia? Do you actually believe Putin would use them? And if it's so, what is the red line that would have to be crossed for him to be willing to actually use them?
I believe the red, to answer the last part first, I believe the red line that would have to be crossed for Putin to actually use the nukes is if the Western world got directly involved in a conventional war with Russia. That's something that he, of course, knows that they cannot win because the Western world will just floor the Russians. I believe he's actually admitted that as well. And so they pretty much are relying on this nuclear crutch to keep their country alive, or else it would just be invaded and his government would be overthrown, apparently in his mind. To answer the first part of the question, I'm not entirely sure if it's credible or not, because these kinds of threats are thrown around when things get very tense in between the West and the East. And so, this could be nothing more than posturing, a threat, but then again, he invaded Ukraine and no one really saw that coming. Some people did, but really no one, including myself, saw that coming. And he's been acting unpredictable in many ways over the recent weeks and months. And so, who knows? Maybe he would use the nukes, maybe he wouldn't. No one's really entirely sure, so I hope that answers the question in a way. I'm never really able to make a discernment on it because logically no one would ever use nuclear weapons, but then at the same time, Putin is threatening to use them and he's been acting irrational, and it also looks like he's bloated and sick or something, so maybe he will. I'm not entirely sure. It could go either way at this point, and we'll just have to see if this actually comes to fruition or not. But I thank you for the question. It's a very good question, and so we're going to move on to the last question of the night, and then we're going to end the stream. And so what's the last question, Matthew?
All right, and the last question tonight is from Jason Baker. He says, any comment on the resignation and defection of Anatoly Chubai in protest of the war?
I haven't actually gotten any news of that. I actually did hear about that today, but I couldn't put it on the news because we just had so many points to cover inside of Ukraine itself that I didn't want to dilute any of the things that we saw today with international news. But we will try and include that a little bit more in the future. But beyond him trying to escape, I haven't really heard much beyond that. So you and me are kind of in the same, like kind of in the dark in the same way at this point about that. And so I hope I answered that question the best I could. We'll try and get some more information on that as time goes on. And so we've actually reached the end of the stream for tonight. I thank y'all all so much for watching. If y'all enjoyed, make sure to liking these videos helps out a lot. And I think that we get a decently low amount of likes because people just click on here and then they watch. And if y'all like it, it really helps us reach out to more people and let them see the news as well. And so I thank y'all all so much for coming tonight. It means a lot to me and it means a lot to everyone here. We'll keep on trying to bring out the news every night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Actually, it starts at 10:10, but the stream turns on at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, but the actual show starts at 10:10 p.m. Eastern Time. So I hope to see y'all all tomorrow, and thank you all once again for your support. It means a lot to me because it lets me continue doing what I do. And so that being said, I'll see y'all all tomorrow. Thank you very much, and I hope y'all find some leaf springs.